listeners, and welcome to this very special edition of the Weekend Report with the Weekend Vigilante. I am your host, Sheila Zilinsky. Joe is in studio manning the board, and together we bring you the Saturday Weekend Report for this Saturday, September 27, 2014 broadcast. Folks, tonight is going to be a very epic show. It's my two favorite Tims, Joe. In the next hour, we're going to be joined by Tim Alberino, so stay tuned for that. And this first hour, my special guest tonight is, of course, one of my favorite people in the world. I gave him the handle, the walking dictionary, for good reason, and he certainly lives up to the title. But what's more impressive about my guest is not only is he the most intelligent man in the world, but he's really very down to earth, and he really is a thorn in Al Gore's side. My guest is none other, folks, than the renowned climatologist and best-selling author, Dr. Tim Ball. Tim speaks worldwide. He's an expert on the climate and water. They're going to be weaponizing water soon. We're going to get into that. And he is really a thorn in Al Gore's side, trust me. He's been fighting the corruption of climate science for a very long time, and he was even sued by the globalist greenies for speaking out against the green agenda, corruption, and the New World Order, and in his role in exposing this climate gate. Now, Doctor, welcome to the program. I am so glad you're on because there's a little thing that happened in New York that we're going to get into. So welcome to the program, Tim.
Well, thank you, Sheila. And I'm wondering how sharp and long a thorn I'd have to be to get through Al Gore's rhinoceros hide. But I'm willing to go there. But
You're
of course,
willing to go there.
Yeah. The problem is that, any analogy with drawing blood from the side and what happened to Jesus, but Al Gore, it's unbelievable what that man's getting away with. It really is.
It is. Well, what's stunning and what is absolutely just frightening is over the weekend here, and just last week, of course, was the big, huge stuff happening in New York with the climate change. They had the big march, but what is stunning is this was really the message in New York from local and global faith leaders who gathered around the UN's sessions on climate change, and there was supposedly 350,000 people. That's really debatable, but this is what the message was. Religion must help us reverse climate change. One of these, the global leaders there said, this is the biggest march against climate change in the world, and so far we need to really try to stay focused on bringing the energy of morality, values, and faith, and especially a commitment to our children and grandchildren to worship Mother Earth the way it needs. The march actually, Tim, was marked by its diversity, people in a real hopeful plight to, change our fossil fuel emissions. But here's the kicker, and here's what I was just so stunned at. They said it was based on wisdom and tradition, and it's clear that climate change presents a spiritual crisis, not just an economic and political debate. Our conversation should be dialoguing with UN leaders around the world, church leaders and the like, how to reverse the dangerous direction this world is taking. Together we share signs of progress, but we need to radically change the course we're on and increase those alarm bells. We need to reverse our present course, Tim. We agreed the necessary transformation from our fossil fuel economy is this. It's going to require the power of faith. So here's what I think is missing, Tim. Environmentalism is not just a social and economic takeover. It's a religious takeover.
Well, it is, but what's really it's almost blasphemous. Not almost, it is blasphemous to claim that these people care about religion. I mean, basically, science is the antithesis of religion. These are the people, that like Richard Dawkins, God is dead, there is no God, and all these other things. And if you spoke to them all the liberals, they're so against religion and faith and belief systems, and yet now, when they're starting to lose an argument, suddenly they're appealing to it. I mean, it truly is. It's like Shakespeare said, even the devil can use the scriptures in his argument, and this is what's going on here. But the other thing about it, Sheila, is that I have been involved with religious groups around the world for exactly this reason. The first experience of it was a woman who was editor of a Scottish Catholic parishioners magazine. They were outraged because the bishop ordered all Scottish priests to preach about global warming in the pulpit. And the parishioners' argument was, look, the Bible very clearly says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God's.
Yeah.
And they don't see nature and climate as anything to do with Caesar. And so this is what's outrageous about this claim. The other large group that I helped deal with this issue was a very large Southern Baptist group out of Coral Gables, and of course they were angry that not only was to talk about it being used in the pulpit, but also in the schools. And so I made a series of short videos for them that they could use in Sunday school to counteract this abuse of the situation in the regular school systems. So for these people in New York to call on faith and say it's an issue of faith, when at very best they're animists. That is, that they believe in the role in pure nature being in control, and I'm not even willing to give them that. But it just is blasphemy.
Well, and if you attend a Christian church, you, whether you like it or not, folks, you're very subtly being taught to follow Gaia. You're being taught about sustainability from preachers, and they've mixed the Bible in with the goals of the UN. And the goal here is really to end Christianity. And people go, oh, Sheila, come on, that's getting a little carried away. But I'm telling you, Gaians, this is very pantheistic and pagan. And look at all these harmony and balance documents with the UN and United States commitment to earth worship, Canada's commitment to earth worship. These Gaians teach that divine earth must be protected from all threats no matter what the cost, and how dare these useless eating plebs on this, according to the United Nations, we are useless plebs. So it's just unbelievable, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, there's another side to it, too, that's blasphemous, and that is, of course, because they're losing and because a lot of the world leaders wouldn't go. And incidentally, I think that one of the best leaders in the world today is Modi of India, the Prime Minister of India, and he shifted the whole moral high ground because, of course, what they're doing by that, you've got to protect planet Earth and it's the future of your children and so on, and all of that emotional blackmail. Well, Modi said, look, we've looked at it. And at best, you're telling us there might be a 0.5 degree Celsius increase in 60 to 100 years, and the science of that is not certain at all. But I've got bigger priorities. I've got people starving to death, and I've got people that need jobs, and so there was that. But the other side of it that was blasphemous, because they couldn't get these big world leaders there, China and all the rest of them, they went and got idolatry. They brought in our old friend Leonardo DiCaprio, and they made him They made him the ambassador of peace, and they gave him a platform. And what does this man know about climate and climate change and climate science? And the answer is absolutely nothing. This is pure idolatry and an appeal to idolatry because people are starting to see through the failure of your message and the game that you're playing. So from top to bottom, it was a charade. I called it a circus, and of course the parade and the charade of the parade. And if you're going to have a circus, you need clowns, and DiCaprio filled the bill very nicely.
Let's use Steve Quayle's word, circus ridiculous. There you go.
yeah, exactly. And of course the other thing that's interesting is that they are saying that, we've got to adapt to change, that these changes are coming for certain. Well, all of their predictions were wrong. They're the ones that are ignoring the change because they said 20 years ago that, it's going to get warmer because CO2 is increasing. Well, the CO2 continued to increase, but it got cooler. And so they are ignoring the evidence. They're ignoring the facts. They're ignoring the science. And then, of course, they also, 20 years ago, or before that, actually, 30 years ago, where they set up the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that was all about socialism, the great robbing the rich and paying the poor, taking wealth from the developed and giving to the developing. It was a transfer of wealth. That's what the Kyoto Protocol was about. Well, they identified 13 nations in what was called Annex 1 in the Kyoto Protocol, 13 nations that they said had developed, had increased their economy, had become wealthy at the expense of the poor nations, the developing nations. And in doing that, they'd use CO2 and put CO2 into the atmosphere through their burning of fossil fuels, and that had caused global warming, which was killing the Earth. Well, of the 13 nations that were in that Annex 1, there were a whole lot of nations that were not included, the developing nations. And so those 13 nations were going to have to pay a fine for their sins. And that money was going to be transferred to the developing nations. Well, guess what? At least 3 of those developing nations are now developed nations. They've increased their economies. China, India, Russia, Brazil. And
the BRICS nations.
The BRICS nations. And what did China do at that conference? They said, no, we're not buying into your climate change nonsense. And oh, by the way, you claim you used this CO2 and you did all this damage and you promised to pay us. Well, we want our money. Well, of course, suddenly the Obama and the gang in Switzerland, the World Meteorological Organization, the UN, are suddenly trapped. I mean, it's a cynical but very clever ploy by China to underline the hypocrisy of what these people are doing. And so the whole climate conference in UN was an absolute fiasco.
Well, essentially, I think it's important for people to understand that, this whole scientific fascism is really based upon folks that this is the hypothesis, and it's that CO2 is a gas that traps heat in the Earth's atmosphere, and if CO2 continues to increase, the temperatures will rise. So, they're predicting that the world is going to warm, and this is just unbelievable that, they keep saying, CO2 is going up, the temperature is going up, and you just touched on it. The original point of Kyoto was a transfer of wealth. It's pure socialism wealth transfer through that protocol and the carbon tax scheme and everything else. It's absolutely unbelievable. So this UN summit was a circus, you're right, and most of the big countries, the BRICS countries, as you said, told Obama and everyone else to stick it. Exactly.
And not only that, but several things. One is that assumption that an increase in CO2 will cause an increase in temperature is contradicted by the evidence, as I've been pointing out for over 30 years now, because in every record that we've got from anywhere in the world, at any time in the history of the world, for any duration, every single time the temperature increases before the CO2. In other words, what happens in the real world, which these people don't live in, of course, is exactly the opposite of the basic assumption that they make. And that is, of course, then add to that a very simple definition of science is the ability to predict. If your prediction is wrong, your science is wrong. And every single prediction that the United Nations climate people have made, I mean, everyone, not even one that was right. Every single one has been wrong. And yet they're in New York saying, oh, this is going to happen and we're certain about it and you've got to listen to us. And say, well, but your predictions have been wrong up to now. Oh, well, don't worry about that. Oh, don't let the facts get in the way of what we want you to do.
Don't let the facts get in the way.
No, exactly. And so, of course, the public are starting to understand. India, with its position, took back the moral high ground. People are saying, look, we're not going to be eco-bullied anymore. And of course, all they could do was fall back on a big parade, a big charade, and the circus that was in New York. And personally, I think that this abuse of the United Nations is more than justification for simply shutting it down. If anything was to be done with the United Nations, and I don't think it is salvageable, I think it's been so abused and cost so much money that with no little return, that if anything was to be done, it should be, the headquarters of it should be moved to Jerusalem, They should declare Jerusalem an international city, which it truly is because it represents three of the great faiths of the world, and put them right at the heart of all of the problems and issues. But of course they wouldn't want that, because I remember, Sheila, back in the 80s, late 80s, I sat down and calculated that if the UN simply canceled first-class air travel, they would have saved $486 million a year. That's in 1980. And so you start to see, and I saw the figures recently in New York. I've forgotten, I think it was the Egyptian delegation, but the parking tickets they've run up, $33 million. It's unbelievable, the waste, the abuse, the bullying of people, the lack of accountability, and of course, but that's what makes it perfect for these people that want one world government, one world agenda.
Well, Dwight Eisenhower, remember, he warned us of a danger, and that was a scientific and technological elite. You know, forget just the military-industrial complex. He was warning about that public policy stuff back in the 60s.
Yeah, well, in his retirement speech, his farewell speech in Congress, yes, he brought that forward. And, of course, it relates to how these people have set this up. I've made the quote to you before, but Mary McCarthy commented several years ago that bureaucracy is the rule of no one. It's the modern form of despotism. And, of course, the UN is the perfect bureaucratic delight, answerable to nobody, and doing whatever they want with impunity and just saying, you've got to pay the bill, and that's the end of it. Now, you see the parallel of that, of course, with what Obama's doing in the U.S. You see the IRS setting an EPA, operating without Congress and making their own rules, and so on. But here's the thing. When Maurice Strong set up at the Rio Declaration, the Rio Conference, he set up the whole Agenda 21. Well, a subset of that was the United Nations, and I always forget what the F stands for, but it's the UNFCCC. It's the anyway, people can look it up for themselves.
I think it's F for Tim. I think it's F for fraud. I'm pretty sure.
Well, yeah, that's certainly more appropriate than whatever it is. But it's I think it's the United Nations Foundation on Climate Change or something like that. But anyway, out of that they came with the IPCC, this Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. It was deliberately set up to create the scientific result that they wanted. And, of course, that is so opposite to the antithesis of science that in science you speculate on something, then you go out and test it. If it doesn't hold up, you go back and either modify it or change it or start over again. What they did was they set up science to guarantee the outcome. Now, how did they do that? Well, Maurice Strong, and I've spoken to people that grew up with him, that worked with him, that worked for him, know him, and they all said he was an absolute manipulator, right? He was the devil incarnate, and his skill was in setting up bureaucracies. And, of course, he then went to the UN, set up the IPCC through the World Meteorological Organization. Now, this is one of those global agencies that supposedly is apolitical. It's supposed to be monitoring global weather and giving that data and information to the public to use as it fits their situation. But what Strong did was he turned it into a political bureaucracy because they're the ones, and the WMO is made up of representatives appointed by every national weather and environment office in every country in the world. So it's the bureaucrats in control. They appoint the people. They set up the IPCC, and of course Strong knew that. And the way it happens is that they then go forward with a policy on climate and weather, and you see the NOAA doing this, and the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, Environment Canada doing it. They go and tell the politicians, here's what you got to do politically. And the politicians say, well, hang on a minute. And then they say, oh, well, hey, we're the experts. We know what's going on. How dare you question us? The politicians are bullied and browbeaten into doing these things. And Strong knew that. And so it gave him absolute control. And by the way, this recent UN conference was preceded by action by the World Meteorological Organization. They made a series of 1-minute videos that they put out to the world television and world media networks. The first one that came out weeks before the conference in New York was a weather forecast for 2050. And guess what it said? It said we're all going to fry. We're all droughts and death and destruction. And I mean, this is bureaucracy. It's got nothing to do with science. But of course,
it is just stunning. It is just stunning. I mean, because according to Al Gore, it's surprising that the Earth hasn't just exploded in a ball of flames. But this is when did Leonardo DiCaprio, though, seriously, when did he become a top climatologist? I actually ask people, Tim, when I go out to stores and stuff, everybody's driving their smart cars and they're saving the planet. I actually encourage people to ask people that are saving the planet, what are you saving the planet from? That's my question.
Yep.
We should be saving it from Al Gore and his band of merry men, but that's another show.
Well, of course, there is a larger argument that, but by the way, DiCaprio got his qualifications in the same year and at the same university that Al Gore did, and it's the university of failures, and Gore is of that new breed of, well, not new breed, but that breed of politician who fail at everything they try, and then fall back into politics. And, of course, all you got to do in politics is have the willingness to lie without being embarrassed by being caught in a lie. In other words, there's no social conscience with these people. And we've got the same problem in Canada with Justin Trudeau, who simply has failed at everything he's ever tried. But being a politician is very easy. All you got to do is show up for meetings. And you don't even have to say anything at those meetings. But if you want to say something, you can do it very simply. Say, well, what's this going to cost? All right, and make yourself look like you're intelligent. But in fact,
in Al Gore's book, Earth in the Balance, one thing I was stunned that he did say, and we were talking about, how they're trying to erode Christianity. He actually said, and this is a quote, people can go get the book or look it up, the last vestige of organized goddess worship was eliminated by Christianity as late as the 15th century in Lithuania. And then he quotes Desjardins, and he goes on to say, Tim, the fate of mankind as well as of religion, it depends upon the emergence of a new faith in the future. That new faith was worshiping our Mother Earth. That is just, oh my goodness.
Yeah, and go back to the point I made earlier about these people are atheists. They're completely against faith, and yet they use it. They are the real hypocrites. And I remember at a conference for Hutterites, who are a very fundamental religious group in Canada here, and they have colonies where they farm, and they at the conference, they had a dinner, and all through the dinner, each of the men went up and told a story and so on. And one of the stories I loved was the guy said that Brother Jake hadn't been in church, and the minister talked to him and said, well, Brother Jake, we're very upset you're not in church. And Jake said, why should I go to church? He said, it's full of hypocrites. He said, they pray on Sunday and they sin on Monday. Hypocrites, all of them. And I thought, well, that sums it up.
Well, that kind of reminds me of, it reminds me of the bigger question of, and I guess the bigger premise is that, this is really a new religion for the younger generation. And also, people say it's a new religion for the new age, but it's about, not questioning things as well. You're not allowed to ask the question why, which reminds me of a little story you had about the parishioner there. Do you remember the series, back in the 80s.
Oh yes,
where
it was Bless Me Father. It was a series about a very old priest in Liverpool, England, and he had a new young curate. And it was actually, the story was written by a Catholic priest. And in one of the episodes, a middle-aged woman came in for conversion to Catholicism, and the old priest thought this would be a good test for the young person. And the young curate, of course, is using the Catechism, which is the Catholic rule book, if you want. And he'd say something, and then she'd say, why? And, of course, he'd try to answer, well, at a certain point, you just have to, it's faith. It's faith in God. It's faith in the Word of God. And of course, the young curate didn't know how to handle that. The old priest's listening at the door, and he realizes the curate's in trouble. And he barges into the room, and he says, now, madam, he said, that Y word, he said, that's a Protestant word. We don't use that here in the Catholic religion.
We don't use the word Y.
We don't use the Y, exactly. But the other side of this issue, I think, and you and I have talked about it before, part of what's going on here, you mentioned that the young people have adopted the Gaia and that environmentalism as a religion, and that's what Gore is talking about and exploiting. But it came about because, of course, Darwin was used by science to challenge religion, and the church effectively, or the science effectively defeated the church. Now, one of the critical points in the U.S. about this was the Scopes monkey trial in Tennessee, and they made the movie about it. Hollywood, that great empire of faith out there, and what happened was a teacher was teaching creationism in the classroom. And they took him to court and said, "No, you've got to teach Darwin's evolutionary theory." And the final verdict, by the way, was that you can't teach creationism at all. You can only teach Darwin's evolutionary theory. Well, what are you doing? Why don't you allow both to be taught? What's the problem? And the answer is, of course, they had to defeat religion. Now, once you defeat religion, of course, then you've got the question, well, if we're not here for God's purpose, why are animals here, and why are humans different than all the other animals? And the only way that the academic world could respond to that was create the social sciences, which, of course, I call human navel-gazing. They're trying to define humans as different from all the other animals, and of course, finding out that they're remarkably different. But this is all part of it. So now you've got young people, and I think I told you the story, Sheila, about in class one time, and I deliberately would, poke the students and try to get them thinking. And I made a comment, and one of the students who was sort of on the edge of his seat, and he suddenly blurted out, "I don't believe you." And I said, there was, of course, the class gasped and awed and figured, he's going to fail the class for sure. And I said to him, "Well, what don't you believe, Thomas?" And he said, "Well, my name isn't Thomas." And, of course, then I realized that he didn't know the reference. So I asked the class, and it was close to 300 students, how many knew the reference? And very, very few of them knew what I was talking about.
Doubting Thomas.
And so, yeah, exactly, Doubting Thomas. And of course, then his comment was, "Well, I don't need religion. What difference does that make?" And I said, "Look, the library is the heart of this university, and virtually every book that is in there, from science through to art or whatever, it comes from a Judeo-Christian philosophical base. And if you don't understand that, you're not going to understand what those books are telling you." But, of course, what was left was a vacuum. And what will move into a vacuum is the devil. And what was the devil was the whole idea of global warming, that humans are the problem. We've got to reduce and even get rid of the humans. And one of the things that we talked about before, and I think needs to come back to, is the very, very deep-seated anti-humanism in the whole environmental movement. That and it was summed up, of course, beautifully in that bumper sticker that said, "Save the planet, kill yourself."
Isn't that unbelievable? Well, and here's the thing is that, do you remember Brian Sussman? Of course, he's the author of Eco-Tyranny. Boy, this really is eco-tyranny. Do you remember he told the story of that little girl that was 10 at a conference that said, there's no sense us even living. We might as well just kill ourselves because we're all killing the planet. I mean, that is just when a little child is taught that they're nothing more than a useless eater. They have less rights than a rock because really, Mother Gaia again. I mean, Tim, not very many people are aware of what their children are being taught. I mean, Common Core is a sci-fi, but I got to tell you again, this is so important because when my son, he was, this was grade 6 at the time, he brought a textbook home a few years ago, and the very big caption, the table of contents was, the UN and you, and then the next little paragraph was becoming a global citizen. And then they gave him a little one-page thing. They had to bring it home and they had to sign this, and it was, I pledge allegiance to Mother Earth, and then it went through the 10 commandments of sustainability and work. I mean, I went steaming into that superintendent. So I ended up actually getting it out of every school in Canada. But the nefarious part of it is that every little child was taught, and this is how our children are being indoctrinated to worship Mother Gaia. Forget the 10 Commandments. That stuff's dusty and dry. This is a new religion for the young people, isn't it? And it is frightening.
Well, and of course, you see it's the curriculum, and who controls the curriculum but the teachers? And who are the teachers controlled by? The unions. And what do the unions want? Total government control. And of course, the schools are where let's go back to religion again. Ignatius Loyola, the founder of the Jesuits, the thought police for the Catholic religion. And he was the person that said, give me the child and I'll give you the adult. And that's exactly what's happening. And you see it in the attempts at core curriculum and all of these other attempts to get into the children's mind and create the little citizen for tomorrow. And
Maggie Thatcher needed an educated population, but she also knew what happens the minute you give people education, they start asking questions. And what did adults say? Leaders are lucky that what?
Well, Hitler said that people are lucky that most people don't think, and but he should add to that that most people don't ask questions, and of course that's what they want to do. They want to silence you, and one of the things that they're very good at, and this is what's happened to me, is that the minute somebody starts to ask questions, they're very quick at marginalizing them. They either will attack the individual, such as happened with me, where they put out lies that I was paid by the oil companies, guilt by association, or they'll put you into a little group, or that you're a birther, or that you're a climate skeptic, or you're a climate change denier.
No, now I'm a climate. No, Tim, now I've been labeled a climate criminal.
Yes, of course. And Robert Kennedy Jr., he wants you locked up. He wants you locked up. The Kennedys moralizing to other people, give me a break. I mean, it is unbelievable what is going on here.
Well, but David Suzuki goes around the globe, and actually he is calling now for very strict sanctions, including jailing people that are not going to, adhere to this big agenda, this green agenda. Jailing people, jailing us climate criminals.
Well, of course, I mean, if you look at what Hitler did in his totalitarian takeover, you identify the troublemakers and you get rid of them. And I mean, literally get rid of them.
Well, speaking of being a troublemaker, you actually got sued by these greenies. Tell our listening audience a little bit about that's unbelievable. Tell them.
Well, I've been sued 4 times, all by the same lawyer, and it's one of the things that's going on as part of this campaign is the use of the law to silence people. The lawsuits that are brought under this guise are called SLAPP lawsuits. The SLAPP is an acronym for Strategic Lawsuits Against Public Participation. What's interesting is the legal profession had a conscience about it because they realized, not because they cared about people who were hit with them, but because they thought it was a misuse of the law, that the law is supposedly to protect people and not to punish them. And so there was a legal conscience about this, but it wasn't necessarily a moral conscience. And so 48 of the 50 states have banned slap legislation, and 8 of the 10 Canadian provinces have banned them. But my lawsuits came from the one province where they are not banned. And, of course, what they do is they file a lawsuit against you of defamation, and you've got a choice. You can either say, well, I withdraw what I said, and then immediately they say, oh, I see, proved he's a liar, he's this and that and the other. Or you can fight it. Well, if you're going to fight it, it's going to cost you a whole pile of money. And so they know that. It's an abuse of the law in every way. It's an abuse of the morality of the law in every way. And I can understand why people don't fight these things. And now fortunately, somebody helped me set up a PayPal site where people have contributed to my legal fund. But I'll tell you, it is truly, truly frightening when they decide to isolate you and and identify you. And all you have to do is watch some of the congressional hearings on these people that were identified by the IRS or identified by EPA. And when that weight of that unaccountable, faceless bureaucracy comes down on you, it is truly frightening. And unless you've experienced it, you really can't understand how nasty it is. And but I mean, it's like I'm no great hero, but like Edmund Burke said, that evil triumphs when good people stand idly by, which is why we've got to speak out, why we've got to gird people to action, why we've got to get people to ask questions. And what's even more frightening about it, Sheila, is that, Gore and those people, Kerry is saying it, the global warming is a greater threat than ISIS.
Yeah.
Well, he's right. He's right, but for the wrong reason. It's a threat because your own government is using it to defeat you. It's the enemy within. That's why global warming is frightening.
It absolutely is the enemy within. I mean, I think about, Lord Monckton. He recently, do you remember the different numbers it was? And then they published an article that, 97% of science people, they agree that man is causing global warming. Well, tell people why Lord Monckton is suing them over that.
Okay, well, this argument started before the Monckton incident, but the Monckton incident is the most egregious and actually is, I think, going to be the one that can turn the tables on it. But it began with a woman by the name of Naomi Oreskes, Oreske, and of course Gore quotes her in his movie. John Kerry has quoted her and other people, and she Googled the words global warming and came up with 24 articles, all of which said global warming is by humans is a reality. Or not all of them, but 95% of them. She then published that as an article. What was wrong with that was, as everybody knows who's ever done a Google search, what you get back is determined by the keywords that you punch in. If you punch in articles disagreeing with global warming, you get a whole different set of articles back at you. But she was saying, well, this is proof positive that 95% of the science community agrees. Well, as we started to point out that it was a Google search and that was what determined the outcome, then all of a sudden another article appeared from the Professor Cook in Queensland, Australia, in which he claimed that 97% of all the articles that he'd looked at, 97% of them supported that humans were causing global warming. Well, that got published. And, of course, that's the 97% figure that Obama used in his State of the Union address, and he used in everywhere he's gone, at the UN and everywhere else. But Monckton and other people went and got the data on it. And the data was that, in fact, they they'd looked at some 11,000 and more articles, but they'd rejected all but about, I've forgotten what the numbers were. You might have the numbers in front of you there, Sheila, but it's something less than 600 that they ended up looking at. And then of those, only 64 of them actually said that humans were the cause of global warming. So the final figure, as Moncton points out, was actually less than 0.5% of all of the articles that they looked at said that humans were the cause of global warming. Now, this
instead of 97% of people agree that, top climatologists agree that man is causing global warming, it turns out that less than 0.05% of them actually thought that.
Yeah, exactly. Now, that data was presented to the academic journal that published Cook's article, and they withdrew the article.
This reminds me of, who are those Huxter Berkeley scientists on the chlorine, the ozone thing? Tell people how the ozone issue even came up.
Okay, the ozone issue was a test case. It was an experiment to find or to blame humans for a natural event. It was a forerunner for the whole global warming CO2 issue. And it began back in the 70s when the British Antarctic expedition were measuring ozone levels, and they discovered that the ozone was quite thin over Antarctica. And they published that. And I remember when it was published. And they said at the time, look, don't rush to judgment on this. But, of course, what happened was, this is the ozone's thin. It must be something humans are doing, because, you see, that's the theme of everything they do. We've got to show that humans are doing this, that they're the cause of all change, and change is not natural. Therefore, it must be humans, because humans are not natural. And so all of a sudden we got this story about a hole in the ozone over Antarctica. Now, PR and terminology, as I've mentioned, with things like birthing, climate skeptics, and greenhouse effect, these are all public relations terms. Why the greenhouse effect? Greenhouses are hot. That's a threat. Holes in the ozone. There's a hole in the atmosphere. Terrible death rays from space are going to come down and kill us all. The truth is, there never was a hole in the ozone. There isn't now, and there probably never will be. There is an area of thinning over Antarctica, which is caused by the circulation of the atmosphere in the upper levels of the world's atmosphere. But, of course, they then had to say, we've got to find some human-produced product that has caused this hole in the ozone. So here we go out to California, Berkeley, and here are these two scientists, Sherwood and Molina, that they put ozone in a bottle in the lab, and they put in CFCs, and boom, it killed the ozone. It destroyed the ozone. So they said, that's it. CFCs, they're the problem. And that was it. It took off. And
Tim, it reminds me of Rachel Carson when you talked about CFCs. Go ahead and enlighten us on her.
We'll do the Carson one because, that precedes the ozone issue. But by the time they'd finished with the ozone issue, of course, they got CFCs banned, which was a new refrigerant that allowed us to store food and save food. In fact, it was a benefit to humans. But they banned it. And then they had the Montreal Protocol where they brought in all of these things against CFCs. And by the way, before this climate conference, the WMO came out and said, look, we know we can bring in protocols and policies that can deal with these issues because the Montreal Protocol worked, because the ozone hole has got smaller. Well, the ozone hole got smaller because it never was big and caused by CFCs. But anyway, prior to the ozone thing was our dear friend Rachel Carson and her book Silent Spring. And she decided that DDT, a chemical that was killing off insects that were like the mosquito that was causing malaria, And she decided that it was causing cancer in humans, and in fact was responsible for the death of her husband. And so she set about proving the DDT was killing off animals, but particularly birds. See, birds are very nice. People get very emotional about birds. And so the word went out that, the DDT is killing birds, it's causing their eggshells to be thin, and therefore the chicks are not hatching. There was never, ever any proof of that. It was absolute rubbish. But
then those 17 African leaders said, hey, we don't care about your UN ban on DDT because we there was obviously they didn't want to hear any more about Rachel Carson's hucksterism. There's a new word. But Paul Driessen wrote Eco-Imperialism, and he exposes, the wider issue that, what these environmentalists have gone to developing certain demonizing lies and forcing eco-imperialism, essentially.
Well, exactly. And what these Western eco-imperialists are doing is saying, we've developed a good lifestyle and we've produced lots of food and we've got people living longer and in better health because of all of the things that we've done. But, by the way, you can't do anything of that because we think it's destroying the planet. I mean, it is an absolute outrage. It's aristocratic superiority of the worst kind. And as I said, the phrase that Driessen came up with in his book, Eco-Imperialism, is exactly what it is. But you see, what these 17 African leaders said was, look, malaria is killing more people in Africa than AIDS. And you're telling us we can't use DDT to get rid of the malaria. And we're saying, or the mosquito, and so we're saying we're going to use it to heck with you, because to use a little bit of DDT to get rid of the mosquito and get rid of malaria, we'll take the risk of the damage to the environment it might do, and so they're fighting back. These people are tired of being pushed around by these arrogant, high-ground, moral superiority people and the Leonardo DiCaprios of the world.
Well, come on, Tim. They're just doing it for the greater good.
Of course, yeah.
Well, it's just like GMOs. I mean, that story reminds me of when they, tried to ban the import of GMO grains, and it was stunning. The gal, what was that gal that went to the 8 countries and surveyed over 10,000 people?
Well, there was a woman in Winnipeg, Canada, and there was 18 companies that put money forward, and she did a survey in 8 countries of several thousand people in each country, and asked them about whether they were concerned about GMO food. And the results were quite stunning because only 2 countries, Britain and Germany, was their concern of GMO foods of about 10%. So in other words, 90% were not concerned about GMO foods at all. But the most telling one of all, and this speaks to these issues, because the CFCs and refrigeration and saving food was the same thing. But in Mexico, when she asked the people, their response was, GMO, we're just glad to get food. And of course, that's the arrogance of these people. That we've got all of these advantages, but you can't have any of them. And when I gave evidence at the Canadian Parliamentary Committee on the ozone issue, and I said, look, you're banning CFCs, but those have created refrigeration, which has reduced our Canadian and American food loss by 30%. And now you're telling these countries they can't do that? And by the way, the difference is in developing countries like India and other places, 60% of the food they produce never makes it to the table. Most of it lost because of inability of refrigeration. And so in Montreal, at the Montreal Protocol, India and China said, we're not going to be part of your Montreal Protocol banning CFCs. It's the same thing. It's identical to what they're now saying about the CO2, because they've seen all of this exploitation and false numbers and the reality of things in terms of their own lives and their struggle to survive. And so they're just saying, no, we're not going to be pushed around by these eco-bullies anymore.
Well, it's stunning. I had a chart sent to me a few years back, and I don't know if people have seen this chart, but it's essentially 10 companies that own all our food supply. And, I mean, GMO is a huge issue, and I think about Nestle, but it's funny, springboarding into weaponizing water, that's a good segue because, you know, it's interesting. Our law in Canada, you know, no corporation can own water, but the Great Lakes is really interesting because, you know, there was this article circulating, Nestle's bought up the Great Lakes, and, you know, they created Dasani, of course. Coca-Cola created Dasani, but it's, you know, they're sort of in bed, these big mega corporations. And it's interesting because all these bottles of water, what is really disturbing, Tim, is they contain fluoride, but they also are demineralized. And what's so incredible, you know, I think about our laws in Canada, that reminds me that we in Canada, it's stunning that, you know, we have the biggest coastline in the world. Yeah, well, we also have the biggest laughing stock of the Navy in the world, but we certainly cannot defend ourselves. But I think about the whole hucksterism there with these corporations in the water, and then in the States you've got T. Boone Pickens buying up more water than any single human on planet Earth. Isn't that frightening?
Well, of course, one of the things that's transitioning is that the climate change is losing its potency as a political vehicle, and of course they're searching around for a replacement, and water is the issue. I mean, one of the ways you can know that is because a person that was involved with the global warming issue, Peter Gleick, at Stanford University, where else, he coined the phrase peak water. And, of course, that is based upon the peak oil idea. We're going to run out of oil. But let me just talk about the corporatism that's going on. Corporations, they're simply not to be trusted unless they're forced to be only in it for profit and to admit that that's the only reason they're in it. As soon as these corporations started using environmental issues or health issues or claiming any other social benefit to what they were doing, don't trust them, don't believe them. When a supermarket is telling you it's selling organic food because it cares about the quality of the food and all the rubbish, you're selling it because you can charge 4 times as much for it. If you were losing money on it, you wouldn't be selling it, period. And so stop all of this high ground of doing the moral and the right thing. And of course, what you see is that they sell their souls quicker than anybody. And all you had to do was look at Solyndra, look at the wind farms, all GE and T. Boone Pickens himself getting into the wind farm game. The minute there was huge government grants available, these people were right there with their hands out. And one of the duplicities of any business, and I mean any business, is that when they're making profit, government go away, government leave me alone. We're going to have free enterprise. The minute they start losing money, government's got to bail me out. I need help. You got to, I'm essential to society. They are back to that word I used earlier. The duplicity of it is really stunning, and that's the problem I have. And of course, you just simply don't trust business. Now, you can debate about profit. I've got no problem with profit. You can debate about what's a reasonable profit, and of course that was the debate in the Middle Ages. And what did they do in the Middle Ages? From the religious perspective, they set a limit on profit margins. It was set at 9%, and anything above 9% was considered usury. All right, and so there were limits set because they saw that if you got more profit than that, you were exploiting people and exploiting the system. And so, as I said, I have no problem with profit, but at a certain to argue that businesses have a moral conscience is absolute nonsense.
But it's hard to believe that, you know, you think about this, there's 331 million people in the United States, and I cannot believe that such a small group of people control the strings. I mean, whatever happened with this we the people when Charles I, you know, look what happened to him, or the French king that said l'état c'est moi, we know they got their heads chopped off because the bottom line is we tell them what to do, not the other way around. But that's just kind of a joke, though, isn't it?
Well, of course, it stems from Lord Acton's comment that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I have believed through all of my adult life that the minute you give somebody power, you must immediately start diminishing that power or limiting that power or taking it away. That was the whole basis of the U.S. Constitution. The Founding Fathers understood that. They started with the correct assumption that people basically are not to be trusted, that they will abuse any system that you set up, that they will take the power and run with it. And so you have to. What's going on now, Obama's failure is Obama's failure, but it's compounded by the failure of the Congress, whose job it was to limit Obama's power, and they're simply not doing it. So power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. I mean, your reference to Charles I, for example, which was one of the things that led up to those Englishmen that came over to America and decided they didn't want monarchy anymore, because Charles I believed in the divine right of kings, that he wasn't answerable to the people, that he was appointed by God, and it was none of their business. And they showed him how much it was their business. They chopped his head off. And so the minute that leaders start to show that belief that they are above the people and not answerable to the people, you have to get rid of them. You have to eliminate them. Now, executions is a pretty permanent way of doing it, but there are better ways of doing it. And, of course, that, again, we come back to the whole democratic system of the U.S. But it's being undermined both at the UN level, and it's being undermined by Obama and through the use of the bureaucracies. See, that's how you get around it, the unaccountable bureaucracies, and you set them up. And it's that old story, that you can't beat City Hall. Well, think about what you used to be able to do. If you didn't like the way City Hall was treating you, you could go to the church. But then they got rid of that. You couldn't take sanctuary in the church anymore. All of that was gone by the wayside. And so what we're seeing on a global scale now, of course, is the concentration of power in one leader. You see it in China, you see it in Russia, in Putin, and you see it in Obama. And it really is a frightening trend. And this is why I think in the U.S., the next phase of the American Revolution has got to be a re-establishment and restatement of the we the people, as you said. And
well,
that's
Tim, we're at the top. We're at the top of the hour, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to take some phone calls. I know a lot of people emailed me asking if we're taking calls. So yes, we will take probably about 15 minutes a call, and then of course we're going to go to Timothy, the other Tim that I like, Tim Alberino. It's going to be 661-244-9839 to take calls, guys. That's 661-244-9839, and press 1. If you're already listening on the phone, you can just press 1 and get into the call queue. And we're going to go to a commercial break. Welcome back to the second hour. Tonight is September 27, 2014. It is the Weekend Report with the Weekend Vigilante. Joe is back in the studio, man on the boards, and our guest, of course, is Dr. Tim Ball, renowned climatologist, joining me, and then very soon we're joined by Tim Alberino. And I'm just going to open up some phone calls because Tim really, ask any question you want to Dr. Tim. In fact, you had a little interesting take on the Ebola virus as well, Tim, which is, it's airborne. We know that now, and it's quite frightening with the CDC owning the patent and the 70% variations. I mean, it is really a sci-fi. I guess it's not even a bad dream because a bad nightmare you can wake up from. So we're going to go to the phone lines and take some callers. So welcome to the program, area code 814. What is your comment or question tonight? We're opening it up. Anything you want to talk about?
Hi, Sheila. And hi, Doctor. Listen,
Yeah.
I just wanted to comment on, or actually ask a question. I guess I'm a little bit ignorant here, but why isn't anyone doing anything about this? I mean, we're not the problem here. I don't get where they're saying that the ozone. I've talked to many of people, and many of people have told me, like, the emissions, and I'm from the United States, but many of people have told me, like, the emission thing is all a fraud. In this ozone thing is also all a fraud, and I'm trying to, I guess, understand. Do you guys have any comments? I could take them off the air.
Yeah. Yes. First of all, just a quick comment about the ozone layer, and I talked about corporatism. The companies that were producing sun blockers, I remember even a few years ago, it was a $9 billion a year industry, and of course it was their advantage to promote the ozone or sun blockers. Up until relatively recently, and a few years, 5 years or so, the sun blockers were not blocking those rays of the sun that are harmful to you. But the other problem that happens is that people wouldn't go out in the sun, and they would put on sun blockers, and they weren't getting enough sunlight or ultraviolet radiation, which creates vitamin D in the body. And the side effects of that are that you end up with rickets, bone diseases, and also scrofula, a form of tuberculosis. And those things are starting to show up, especially in children in more northern latitudes, in the northern part of the U.S., for example. And so the whole thing was a scam. The ozone... yes, it can cause skin cancer if you're out too long. But normally that cancer is caused when you're young, when your skin is forming up to about the age of 16, and you get badly burned often during that time period, but it doesn't manifest itself till you're much, much older. And in fact, you could show scientifically that the increase in skin cancer is directly related to the increase in life expectancy. In other words, more people are living long enough to get the skin cancer. And just to illustrate the point even more, the highest levels of ultraviolet radiation from the sun are in the state of Colorado because it's the highest elevation state, and yet they've got the lowest levels of skin cancer. And so when you start to look at all the evidence, and of course the corporations pushing this, and again it was humans are causing holes in the ozone. It was all part of that scam. And the truth is none of this stuff bears investigation. The minute you start to look into it, who's behind it, who's funding it, what's their agenda, none of it bears investigation. But unfortunately,
Tim, and I want to comment on one of the other part of her question there. That was, why isn't anybody doing anything about it? I think that is an important question, because again, I always say, I'm a good example of somebody that always fights City Hall. So, here's the thing. I mean, Tim and I have written a book that's coming out in the new year. Tim, you've already wrote an incredible book, which is linked on my website if you go to Climate. And that reminds me, too, also, caller, Tim was in a series, and I mean a whack of Alex Jones documentaries. He was in The Great Global Warming Swindle. He's in a new one that's what's really interesting, that Netflix, they might even pick it up. He's trying to get it put to some film festivals, and this young guy's name is Luke Dillard. He was supposed to come on the show, but he's sick. He's got some kind of respiratory thing going on, which seems to be a real theme lately. A big shout out to Doug. Of course, we know we're going to be praying for Doug at the end of the program. But the point is, I've been doing a lot of things. Chris Horner, Tim Ball. There's many, many, many people that are doing things, and I think that's where people have to be supporting the people that are doing things, because whether it's Gaia worship or the death, I call them the eco-friendly pagan death cult, and I mean Christians out there, you have to realize. The Christians on this listening audience have to realize that they are trying to erode Christianity. I mean, this global warming cult is very nefarious. It absolutely is.
The documentary, by the way, is called The Great Global Warming War, and Luke chose that title, and I agree with it, because it is a war. And as I said to you when we were talking, Sheila, that the Greek philosopher Aeschylus said in war, the first casualty is the truth. And that's what's going on here. And, of course, the fact that they appointed DiCaprio as ambassador of peace implies, therefore, that there's a war, and it's so appropriate. But to the listeners'
it's appropriate
question,
also for the Nobel Peace Prize, isn't it?
Oh, there you go. Yeah, which the UN IPCC got, and of course Obama got within 2 months of being elected. It was amazing. But anyway, to the listener's question, one of the reasons that people don't speak out is because they watch other people who do speak out, and this is what ISIS is doing. The minute they pick out people and say, chop your head off, and other people see that and they just say, hey, I'm going to survive, I'll fight another day. And although we're not beheading people yet, in terms of undercutting them financially, in terms of their standing in the society, just Google me and look at all the attacks that have gone on. And I've even had, and this is the level at which it goes, I had employees of government agencies say, we agree with you, but we wouldn't dare say that publicly because we'd lose our jobs. Now, it's all very easy to say, well, you should stand up. But when you've got children and you've got mortgage, it's extremely difficult. And I've had academics, this sounds bizarre, but I've had academics say to me, look, we're kind of, left-wing views of politics, but the minute we agree with you, then we're dubbed as right-wing, conservative cooks, and we don't want to do that, so we're just going to be quiet about it. Now, you could say, well, that's silly, but people are intimidated very easily, and these people that are wielding these axes are very, very good at intimidating people, and that's the major reason. Now, the last reason I'll mention is because the Founding Fathers said that the media, the mainstream media, were the ones that would speak out. They were the ones that would expose corruption. They were the ones that would ask the questions. And in all of these environmental issues, the mainstream media have been noticeably absent. Worse than that, they've been promoting the one side of the issue. So that combination of what I call the unholy alliance is why it's not being battled or fought against. And that's why you've got to do it through your vote. You've got to do it through talking to your neighbor, and you've got to do it in every single small way that you can.
So let's take another caller here, shall we?
Go ahead, Sheila. Yeah.
Yeah, let's take another caller. 915, welcome to the program tonight. What's your question?
Hello, Sheila. Hello, Tim. This is Larry.
Hi, Larry.
Helped y'all
Larry.
When you were on the other show. Not so much a question. Tim, you said something earlier that you and I have talked about this before. We don't have a democracy. We're a representative constitutional republic, bro.
Yeah.
Greece was a democracy. Washington loathed democracy because of it being mob rule. But all that being said, people wonder, why don't they do anything? Well, you look at America. Most people are in a trance in front of their TV set because that flicker rate gets them hypnotized. And in the rest of them, Congress, most of them are either bought off or intimidated. The only one that I've seen speak out is Walter Jones out of North Carolina. He actually has a spine. I'm surprised he's still.
Well, of course, there's so few of them, Larry, that speak out that they're very easy. It's easy to marginalize them. Just say, well, that's just one person. What point does that make? But the other thing is that I worked with a business journalist here and a political journalist here in Canada by the name of Peter Newman, and he once said to me, "There's only two kinds of people that go into politics." And one is the person that says, I've got some ideas that I think can help the country. And the other is the person that says, I've got some ideas that I think can help myself. And he said that all that changes through time is the percentage of each. But he also said to me, right now, the percentage of the latter, that is, people that are in it for themselves, has never been higher. And so that's where the real problem of representative democracy is failing. But another interesting part of this idea of one person, one vote, or one country, one vote, is the UN. The debate has gone on for years there about the problem of each country has a vote. And the proposal has been to make it democratic by allowing the size of the country, the population of the country, to have more votes. But then what does that do to the UN when you've got, China and India would absolutely dominate? But you've also got the problem going on right now with these BRICS nations, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, who have 48% of the world's population. They also have 106 countries in the world that are affiliated with them, and that gives them a majority vote in the United Nations as well. So these ideas about numbers and representation, I've often thought about what is the possibility now with electronics where we have true representation of the individual, that we can all vote on everything. That at the end of every week there's a series of issues that are put up, and every single person votes on them. And with the internet, which to me is the beginnings of the final section of democracy, or that is participation of the individual because of access and freedom of information, we need to start thinking about these possibilities.
Yeah, I agree with that, Tim. Well, let's go to phone lines, a couple more quick calls, and then we're going to be joined soon by Tim Alberino. Let's take area code 778. Welcome to the program tonight. Area code 778. Okay, I'm getting a bad echo. And do we have any caller on the line there? 778. Okay, well, we don't have anybody on there. I just hear somebody's radio on. Let's try 915. Welcome to the program. What is your comment?
Hello again.
Hi.
I'm sorry. I just disagreed with Tim on his idea of democracy because it undermines the basic foundation of the Constitution. And I don't expect...
Okay. So we have... Okay, go ahead, Tim.
No, Larry, I don't disagree with you. I understand that what the United States is all about. It just the use of the term democracy. Maybe I'm using it too loosely, but it is the idea that every individual has a voice and has a right to have that voice heard. The problem comes in its implementation, and of course, I think that's what the founding fathers were trying to get around. So I'm in total agreement with you.
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting debate, isn't it?
Yeah.
Very interesting. I just wanted to, point out to Larry that, we like to throw around these phrases like constitutional, republic and, I guess a democratic system, though, when I think of what that term means, right? And they can be misleading, can't they?
Well, of course, it's the old story. One of the things that I used to do in a political geography class that I taught was talk about constitutions and how countries are formed and what the different sizes of countries and so on. And I would give the students a constitution to read, to discuss for the next class. And they would come in and say, oh, what a marvelous constitution. That's exactly what the world needs. And then I would point out to them it was the Constitution of the Soviet Union. And, of course, it isn't on the piece of paper. You can have all of the nice words, and you can see the rhetoric. As Benjamin Franklin said, here comes the rhetorician with his fancy words and his hollowness. But it's like with a business. The management can make a good management can make a bad system work, and bad management can make a good system fail. And so it is in the will of the people to make the thing function and to understand what it's trying to do. And that's where the real challenge is. And so I'm not sure. Well, it's all, of course, again in the education which we talked about earlier.
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's really important that people really have a look at what their children are being taught. I mean, Common Core. I mean, Tim, you've been a professor for 25 years. What do you think of that?
Well, the Common Core, again, it's a siren song. When you look at the fact that it's trying to go back to the classical liberal arts education, that you become a well-rounded intellectual citizen, but it completely it actually ends up being very elitist. But it's elitist in a narrow control of the school system. It's not elitist in the sense of the better people and the smarter people rising to the top. It's not it's not meritocracy in the sense of improving a system. It narrows it down, and it's part of the difficulty, by the way, that has been created through the academic world. I mean, the academics have defined intelligence in a very narrow way, and then they sit in their ivory towers and say, you got to pay me a salary, you got to pay for me, and oh, by the way, you can't fire me, and you can't make me accountable, but I can tell you how to live and what to do. I mean, it's an outrageous system. And of course you're right, it is an outrageous system, and there is a lot of globally orchestrated things going on that is very front and center to this issue that we're talking about. Tim, I know you have to go. I love the fact you came on tonight. Like I said, I have my two favorite Tims on the program. Thank you so much for coming on. I really want people to go to weekendvigilante.com and click on Dr. Tim Ball link there. It's hyperlinked to his website and his amazing, incredible book, if you don't have a copy, The Deliberate Corruption of Climate Science. Folks, get a copy of it. And, of course, our book, Cool It, Al Gore, will be out probably at the beginning of the year, maybe 2015. I don't know. We've got a lot of jumbled mess, don't we, Tim, yet? Yeah, well, somebody's looking after us, and it'll sort itself out.
Exactly. Thanks again so much for coming on tonight. Folks, we're just going to go to a little quick break. We're going to grab the other Tim, and we'll be back right after this little bumper out. Thanks, folks.
Broadcasting to the world, it's the Weekend Report with Hagmann and Hagmann and the Weekend Vigilante.
Well, folks, tonight, as you all know, this next guest from the Alberino Analysis, his website is linked at weekendvigilante.com. Tim is kind of a Steve Quill protege. Him and I were on a show together about a week or a little bit more than that ago, and I was very impressed with so many things he said. I decided to have him on the program tonight because I really think that he just covered so many incredible issues. One of the things we're going to cover tonight is transhumanism. And, it's really incredible. I think of the, humanoid robots controlling and, essentially every human brain on the planet in a brain-machine interface. It sounds like a ghastly nation of only things that, sinister cartoons are made of. Think about this: genetics, robotics, nanotechnologies. But the bigger, broader term is about post-humanism. I think about the thought of the end of man as we know it. And somebody said that 16-year-olds on this planet right now could be the last actual, we think of all the different things going on. It could be the last really age that they're going to be pure human. And, think about conscious brains transplanted or loaded into computers. DARPA, we know, is funding many of these very nefarious human augmentation projects around the world, and they're doing it in the name of improving performance and resiliency in man. So, Tim, thank you for coming on the program, because I really want to get into this whole idea that, man is too fat, slow, and they're just completely they don't measure up, and it's time to improve performance and resiliency in man and so many other tentacles. But welcome to the program tonight, Tim. Tim Alberino, do we have you on the program?
Oh, my name's Tim, but I'm not Alberino.
Oh, well, that's really okay. Well, Joe actually told me this was Tim Alberino, so just bear with us, and we're going to try to get Tim
I do
on
have
the
a comment, though.
Oh, well, you might as well go ahead while you're on the program.
Okay, I got this last fellow you had on. It's which we are into the republic. We have a republic in a democratic form, but we actually have a republic. And the United Nations is the enforcement arm of the New World Order, of course. And then the last thing is that Doug, for his throat, if he puts real true honey down his throat, just let it dissolve in his mouth. That'll soothe his throat, and nothing can live in honey. There isn't anything, no bacteria can actually live in honey. So it would not only soothe his throat, but it would also cleanse any infection or anything else that's in there. They used to put it in wounds years ago. They still do, I guess. Honey and it'll heal up wounds too. Bed sores and everything. You just put it in there and it'll heal it.
Wow, that's interesting. Well, yeah. I really appreciate that, caller. I very much appreciate the information. Yeah, we're definitely big proponents here of natural remedies, but we do actually have to get ready for Tim Alberino coming on here. So sorry about the mix-up. I guess there's a lot of Tims floating around our lines tonight. But anyway, sir, thank you very much for your call.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
So, hey, Joe, if you're on with us, can you just tell us what's going on with Tim? Joe Hagmann, if you're there, what is the status of our next guest? Well, this is interesting. Okay, folks, we're going to go to a commercial. Sorry for that mix-up, folks. I just wanted to make sure that we had Tim on the line, and we certainly do. I want to jump into this program. So welcome to the program, Tim Alberino.
A pleasure to be with you tonight, Sheila, Joe. I really enjoyed your first guest. Very compelling. I'm the second Timothy tonight.
Well, actually, you're the third because another caller was named Tim, too.
That's right. Yeah.
Anyway, Tim, obviously I'll just do a little quick introduction for people that are just coming on now. My guest, you all know him from the Alberino Analysis. His website is linked on weekendvigilante.com. Again, he is really a protege of Steve Quayle. And like I said earlier, I don't know if you caught this, Tim, but you and I were actually on a program together about a week or so ago, and I was really impressed with so many things that you said, and one of the things that you and I have in common is we are very interested in this transhumanism agenda. And you know, it's really ironic that I don't know how long ago I was stunned. I was sort of going through a grocery store and I found this front cover, and on the Time magazine this front cover was splashed this caption, 2045, the year man becomes immortal. And I really was quite stunned. And I mean, of course, I know these nefarious Ray Kurzweil and his band of merry men. But I was reading through this article. I was really horrified at the thought that we are actually eroding mankind as we know it. We're really talking about post-humanism. And I think that's really newsworthy. And I was driving home and I couldn't get the thought out of my head. This really could be the end of man as we know it. And that thought just really stunned me. And ironically, some weeks later, Tim, I came across a National Geographic front page, and that caught my eye, called The Science of the Brain. And in it really was an eerie, similar overtone of the earlier magazine, and it was talking about how science had figured out the interplay between our brain, our cells, our traits, our behaviors, and what we really need to do here is essentially upgrade our brain. So really, this transhumanism movement embraces the notion that science and technology can improve us as humans. Like I said earlier, we're too fat, slow, thin, and we just don't cut it. God didn't make quite a good enough thing there, so we better help you out, folks. They really do view sickness and aging and death as unnecessary hindrances, and we just have to, the responsibility to overcome this frailty that we have. So my question really is, Tim, I guess it's a funny place to jump in. I think about Steve's book, Xenogenesis, and this concept that, our body's computer, our brain, it's really due for an upgrade. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I am supremely interested in the subject of post-humanism. In fact, I think there are very few subjects that are as compelling and important for us to understand in the days in which we live. People are too ignorant about the technology that's already afoot in the times in which we live, and the absolute ramifications, incredible ramifications that are coming in the future. When I say the future, I mean the very near future. by 2020, especially by 2030. And for those of us who are fathers and mothers, who are parents, even if this transhumanism, if the post-human situation tarries 30, 40, 50 more years, it's going to affect our children. And just the idea that it's going to affect our children ought to be sufficient to get us involved in understanding transhumanism, understanding post-humanism. In fact, the first Timothy that was on tonight, the first Tim that was on tonight, talking about global warming, that's actually an appropriate transition into what we're talking about right now. It's a very appropriate transition, because what's happening is on every single level right now, on every level, technologically, philosophically, religiously, within the secret societies and the occult, the alien agenda, everything is moving towards the same center. You can imagine three spheres being pushed together, like three bubbles being merged into one. You have the philosophy, you have the technology, you have the occult. It's all pushing together towards one absolutely frightening reality. For us, frightening, but for the rest of the world and for the engineers who are behind the scenes, it is the most exciting and wonderful thing that they can possibly imagine. And what I'm referring to is something that I call the new human paradigm. The new human paradigm, because that is precisely what it is. It is a new human paradigm. It is post-humanism. People flip that word around casually. And sometimes I'll be in a conversation with somebody and they'll mention transhumanism or post-humanism. Obviously not someone like you, Sheila, who's very well educated on it. They don't realize what is proceeding from their lips. Post-human means evolving into something that is no longer fully human. And if you have a biblical paradigm, that should send shockwaves through your being. And even if you don't have a biblical paradigm, it is a very frightening scenario because of all the details that are involved in it.
Well, I always talk about, Tim, these Hollywood science fiction hedonistic hucksters and what they pump out. And, you know, it kind of seems far-fetched, but these are the very kinds of dehumanizing transhumanism overtones, whether it's super soldiers or, you know, Iron Man 3 or anything else. Look at G.I. Joe, Rise of the Cobra, and, you know, the nanobugs and Avatar and Minority Report and Gattaca and Elysium and that new movie, sci-fi, Transcendence with Johnny Depp. You know, it's always this intense cross-pollination between the computer, the nanotech, the biotech, the robots, and, you know, what use are humans. And what's interesting is, you know, this is really going to no doubt give unprecedented power in the 21st century to these Ray Kurzweil types. But, you know, these eugenicists created this biotech, and they envisioned the genetic code and the double helix back in the 1860s. So these same Illuminati kingpin hucksters that, you know, animate this same global machine, it's very predatory. It's very anti-human, isn't it?
It's very anti-human. I think some people are confused, probably some people in the audience tonight, because I was confused in the beginning as well. When thinking about transhumanism, it does not seem to be, it does not seem to fit the narrative of the New World Order. It doesn't seem to fit the narrative of the secret societies and the occultists trying to, even now as we see the Ebola virus, trying to eliminate a very large portion of the population of the planet. It was hard for me to put the pieces together to try and figure out how can you have a group of occultists, Luciferians on one hand, trying to eliminate the populace of the earth, the majority of the populace of the earth, and then on the other hand you have a movement of transhumanism, you have a movement of posthumanism that their goal is to extend the lives of the human beings who are presently living and to enhance the lives of the people who are presently living, actually to eliminate death, as you said in the beginning, to defeat mortality. And so the two seem like they're incoherent. How can you have these two things running at the same time? It almost becomes a question in people's minds of which one of these scenarios is going to win, is going to trump the other. Now, obviously the elites of the world, the priests of power, the occultists, the Luciferians, they are already accessing some of the technology in terms of life extension, in terms of genetics, that we won't see for 10 years. And that might be very conservative. Let me just say that as a definite fact. They are already accessing those technologies. So the question then becomes, like I said, who is going to win in this race? Is transhumanism going to become, and by the way, for those who are wondering, transhumanism refers to a transition. It is a transitional point. We have not yet entered into transhumanism. It's actually being constructed behind the scenes. It is the transition into post-humanism or a post-human state. For those who are wondering, we're using those two terms. Transhumanism is it's the transfer from where we are right now. Some people call it humanity 1.0 or mankind 1.0 to a post-human state, which is called humanity 2.0 or mankind 2.0. And so, again, on one hand, you've got the Ray Kurzweils. On one hand, you've got the famous transhumanists, many of them, that are pushing for a global upgrade of the human race collectively. And then on the other hand, you have the occultists that are pushing for a upgrade of themselves, of their bloodlines exclusively, and the enslavement of the rest of the planet. So you do have two separate tracks that are running here, and I feel like there's a lot of confusion out there. I'm speaking from my own experience because it took me a while to wrap my head around this. How can you have both things going at the same time? How is it possible? Why are they allowing transhumanism to become a public issue if they're secretly hoarding the technology behind the scenes, if they've already developed much of it in secret? And the answer becomes clear, and it's astounding, really. The answer simply is that the movement, I shouldn't call it a movement, the cabal, the global cabal of the elites, of the Luciferians, are going to be trumped. They're going to be backstabbed. Transhumanism, post-humanism is inevitable. And let me make this statement. This may surprise people, but I'm going to make it, and I can back it up. It's inevitable not only for the elite. It is inevitable for the majority of the human beings on the planet. Let me rephrase that. It will become compulsory for the majority, for all of us on the planet. It will become something that we will be forced to upgrade or die or be kicked out of society.
Well, it's interesting because how could you compete with, if you're a military guy, how can you compete with these super soldiers? It's really but you're right, it's really the same predatory group that's infested civilization since its beginnings, really, isn't it?
That's right. And you talk about competition. I have a book I'm writing about this issue called The Human Condition. And in the book, I describe two classes that, and some people have talked about this with different terminology, but I describe two classes of civilization in the future. It's not going to be about money, by the way, in the future. It's not going to be about assets in the future. We're not going to be dealing with the caste system that we have now of the 1% on top who controls most of the wealth and then trickling down all the way down to the lower rung, which is the poverty level. The currency of the future is life. The currency of the future is technology. That's the currency of the future. And we're going to have a caste system. A new caste system is going to arise on this planet. And it ties into the book of Revelations. It ties into the book of Daniel. It ties in to the end times. We have to understand this. Without this information that we're talking about tonight, we cannot rightly understand what's coming in terms of biblical prophecy. We can't. It's impossible because these are the days in which we live, And whether people are ignorant to it, whether they don't want to see it, it doesn't make a difference. It's happening. So that this new caste system that I'm referring to is what I call the neo-humans versus the nea-humans. And what I mean by that is neo, obviously, the term neo means new. New humans, post-humans, upgraded humans, consciously evolved humans versus nea-humans. And the term nea is just a shortening of the word Neanderthal, because that's what we're going to be. Those of us who do not consciously upgrade, we are going to be Neanderthal compared to Cro-Magnon. We are going to be the new Neanderthal. We will be looked at as the most stupid, obtuse, idiotic people on the planet, as religious fanatics and what have you. And to a degree, in terms of intelligence, you talked about competing on the battlefield. Well, how are my children going to compete in university in the future, by the time they're the age to go to university, with young people who have a chip implanted into their neocortex that gives them far more capacity for memory, just like a computer, than my child would have innately? How in the world would my child compete with that person? And this isn't a question of if. This is only a question of when. It's only a question of when, because it's going to happen.
Well, I think of, as you were talking, I mean, it's very macabre and creepy that the trend is toward these ever more intimate interactions with machines. You know, I think of the movie where the guy falls in love with the computer. What was that? Her, with Joaquin Phoenix. And, you know, ever more central to our lives is, you know, the voice-controlled software like Siri and Google trying to use technology to understand us. And we're moving more and more towards an intimate interface like the interface we have with each other with computers. And it was really stunning because the June 15th and 16th Strategic Initiative Conference in New York City in 2013, I was really stunned because, as you know, Ray Kurzweil has kind of championed this singularity, and he's been kind of the major spokesman for the transhumanists. But the Kurzweils and everything else were saying, you know, as you were talking, you're talking about your kids, how are they going to compete? Well, they said, you know, we really have a lot of design flaws and damaged design. That was stunning. And what was more stunning is he actually went on to say, you know, the Dmitry Itzkovs and all these pioneers for, you know, the race for immortality, they really said they had this avatar project which could come out as soon as 2015. And in fact, if people go to 2045.com, you can see their first phase. And they literally were ready to, you know, upload people's brains into these avatar projects as early as 2015, 2016. I mean, isn't that just unbelievable that you can just upload your brain into an avatar? I mean, those are the things of a nightmare. But actually, this, you can't wake up from this, can you?
Oh no, you can't wake up with it. In fact, it's going to get real scary for those of us who decide that we're not going to be a part of this upgrade. Now, let me break down for a moment what I described in the beginning. Like I said, imagine three bubbles being pressed together to form one, three spheres amalgamating into one. And I mentioned that one of those spheres is the philosophy. The other, and when I say philosophy, these bubbles are the catalysts that are leading to the new human paradigm, post-humanism. You have the philosophy, and in the philosophy, you have evolution, you have eugenics, you have what your previous guest was talking about. You have this global warming and the worship of Gaia, the worship of the earth. Then you have, on the other bubble, you have the occult. You have the engine behind the scenes that is funding this and fueling this, not only fueling it in a spiritual, in a supernatural sense, but funding it in a very material sense, funding all the pieces and parts that are leading to the ultimate goal. You have in the occult section, in the occult bubble, if you will, you have the whole alien agenda, the secret societies, Luciferianism. And where those two bubbles come together, the occult and the philosophy, you have a new religion arising. And I'll get to that in a minute. But and then the final bubble is the technology, which, folks, it's already here. We're not talking about the future. We're talking about now. The only thing left for the new human paradigm to begin to materialize is for the ethical, the political, and the religious hurdles to be removed. That's it. That's all that's left. Because if those, and they're working on that very hard, by the way, right now, right behind the scenes, if you remove those hurdles, we already have enough technology right now, and this is evident by the projects that DARPA has been working on for years and what we've already been able to accomplish. We already have the technology right now to begin to modify the human genome in profound ways, and that's the genetics. That's just the genetics. We have the technology to modify human anatomy via robotics right now in profound ways. We have devices out there, then they're in their prototype phase, but they work, that allow blind people to see and deaf people to hear. Again, they're in their prototype phase. They're just beginning. They're not the greatest technology in the world yet, but just like Kurzweil says, and he's absolutely right, the technological trend is not linear. It is exponential. It is the hockey stick on the chart. It's going through the roof, and it's going through the roof at a dynamic, incredible rate. And, of course, you have nanotechnology, which is going to be able to allow the modification of the human race on a cellular level. Those are three separate technologies that are right now merging together. They're merging together. They're merging with these other two bubbles I was talking about. They're going to form a new human paradigm, and that new human paradigm that I'm referring to can be summed up in one word. One word: apotheosis. That's it. That's what it is. It is apotheosis. It is the serpent in the garden. It is the fruit that Eve partook of. It is becoming like God. It is full circle, and we see it coming full circle. A lot of people point to Israel as being one of the most profound timepieces in terms of being able to understand where we are on the end times prophetic clock. I think that's true. There's truth to that. But what most people don't realize is that the real timepiece is the whole story. I see the Bible as, I view it more as a story. It's absolutely true and infallible. But I see it as a story. That's how I learned to see it. And because I see it as a story, I can see beginning from end from beginning as a narrative. And what's happening is it's coming full circle. And it's taken all this time to come full circle. It's taken all this time to go from the Garden of Eden to the flood of Noah to mankind beginning to slowly recuperate what was lost in the flood, namely the Golden Age, because that's what the new human paradigm is known as in the occultic world, in the New Age world. It's the Golden Age, and it's the golden race. That's what they refer to. They refer to the new human paradigm or posthumanism as the golden race. It's nothing new. It's just the old, the arcane being repeated. It's full circle back to what once was in a very specific period, epoch of the Earth's history. And this is all going to be the glue that is going to hold all of this together. The glue is a religion. It is a religion, and it is a religion that is coming out of parts of it are going to come out of the Gaia movement, the global warming situation. It's going to draw its tenets from many different religions, and it is going to be solidified by an appearance of beings that are not human, that are vastly more intelligent than we are, they're going to come bearing gifts for humanity, gifts, by the way, that are going to change society and radically profound ways for the quote-unquote better. And remember, the Bible says, woe to those who call good evil and evil good, or evil good and good evil. Woe to those who call good evil in those days, because it's going to look good and every fiber of your being, except for the part that's connected to the Lord and the Spirit, is going to want to go for this, because it's going to solve hunger, it's going to solve disease, it's going to solve genetic disorders. And by the way, they need to bring the earth to their knees before this is fully implemented. They need the whole earth to be crying out for a savior, for peace and safety. So this religion has a name, and the name is called conscious evolution, or at least in my opinion, I believe that this is the idea that it's going to revolve around, conscious evolution.
Well, it's a total genetic rewrite of creation. I mean, Tim, these people believe God's creation doesn't quite cut it. And it remarkably, you just mentioned the Garden of Eden, it remarkably echoes that same lie that Satan peddled to Eve in the garden, you will become like gods. It really serves as a reminder of what the human race is without the blood of Jesus, an enemy of God, and a movement which views, its ultimate purpose as bringing enlightenment to the universe. That really it kind of sets itself up in direct opposition to God's own purpose, really the definition of rebellion, isn't it?
Absolutely, and people really need to understand that when we talk about upgrading humanity, that when we talk about the technology that's coming and that's here, they have to understand that these are not ethereal ideas. These are not metaphoric ideas. These are ideas, philosophy, technologies that are going to fundamentally change everyday life for the human race. These are technologies that are going to fundamentally change the way that we think about the world, the way that we think about the planet on which we live, and most importantly, the way that we think about ourselves, because the real question that's coming down the pipe, and I sound like a parrot every time I'm on the radio because I keep saying it over and over and over. This is something that was seeded in me a long time ago, this warning, this message. This is the question. This is the question that we all need to be asking, that I shouldn't say no, but that the majority of Christian people, especially pastors, are not even contemplating yet. And the majority of people in general are not even contemplating yet. And it's this question: what does it mean to be a human being? What does that mean? Define human. And for us, for thousands of years, it's been quite simple for us to define human, because we only could be human. We couldn't be anything but human. We didn't know anything besides human and animal. That's it. And there were the angels and God and demons, these sort of ambiguous, nebulous ideas that weren't really tangible. But what happens when that paradigm, that age-old paradigm that we have about ourselves, is suddenly busted, is suddenly broken to pieces, shattered by the reality, two realities. Number one, that we now have the ability. This is what the transhumanists are really pushing and are out there preaching, the transhumanists and the futurists. We have the ability to decide what we want to become as a race. We have the ability to consciously evolve ourselves into something other than human. We have the seeds of that ability right now. And again, we're talking about technology that will increase in terms of development exponentially, not linearly, exponentially. So what does it mean to be human? That's the first thing that's going to shatter that paradigm is, okay, now we have the technology to change ourselves. That's a big deal. The second thing is going to really catalyze this whole idea, is going to really push it through the roof, is when they, and when I use the term they, I'm referring to the they that the Bible talks about somewhat ambiguously. For example, in Daniel, where he says concerning that statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw, they shall mingle with the seed of men. Obviously, they are not the seed of men. When they show up on the scene, this thing goes into overdrive. That's the global financial collapse, which is imminent, the some kind of a global pandemic, whether it is Ebola, whether it's this Ebola or whether it's something coming behind it, is imminent. That's not hyping things up. That's not fear-mongering. That is stone-cold fact. Stone-cold fact. And if people don't like it, too bad. Keep your eyes closed, put your hands over your ears, and stick your head in the bathtub, because that's the only way you're going to avoid the inevitable. It is inevitable. It is coming. Posthumanism is coming, and they are coming. And when I say they are not fully human. They are going to claim many things and be able to back up their claims with demonstrations of technology, of knowledge, using every form of deception ever conceived in the bowels of hell.
Well, this is really the ultra high-tech dream of these mad New World scientists to use these radical advancements in technology, augmenting the human body and mind, and ultimately the entire human experience, meriting the label, as we said in the beginning, post-human. This is Huxley's 21st century vision of a scientific dictatorship, really. I mean, it's almost the ultimate form of control and servitude, creating a race of cybernetic slaves, really, because behind all of this, Tim, no matter how you look at it, it's as if we are being genetically engineered and brain chipped for total control. I mean, even now, it was really interesting in Vancouver, Canada, they were the first to come out with these transgender bathrooms. Isn't that wonderful? You know, we're rocket sledding at breakneck speed into this complete brave new world of the genderless. This is the androgynous new humanity that the devil dreamed of, I'm sure. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And when you say genderless, you know what the root of that is. We're talking about the occult. Specifically, when I say the occult,
yes,
so the audience knows, I'm talking about the esoteric world. I'm talking about the world that is having intercourse with demons, as Pember would say, and I mean that both sexually and just intellectually and on a basis of just contact. They're having intercourse with demons, and the transgender thing literally comes from that. And because this idea of transgender, of neither being male nor female, is really an idea that has been really promulgated for years by the Theosophical Society, by Theosophy, and Helena Blavatsky, Madame Blavatsky, because the occult believes, and I should refine that, the people, most people understand what the New Age movement is. One of the tenets, in the term New Age movement, is of course ambiguous. There's different groups and different factions, but one of the tenets that most of them agree on is that humanity for many ages has been predominantly male, masculine, and that we're going through a transition. Right now, we're going through a transition, and the future of humanity is going to be more feminine and ultimately transgender, basically gender neutral, being both feminine and male. Some people call that metrosexual. There's other terms for it. And my God, isn't that what's happening? Exactly what's happening. People have lost touch. Men have lost touch with their masculinity for many reasons in modern society. And by the way, not just in America. I'd say America. I think we have America is one of the last strongholds of testosterone on this planet, just because of the independence and the freedom-loving nature of so many of the people here. We're a tough nut to crack over here. We really are. If you go to third world countries, my God, they've already been taken over by that feminine spirit. I can certainly speak for Peru, and I'm not dissing Peru right now, but there is such a lack of masculinity especially I observed in the Peruvian men, and on a global scale, it's being stripped away because it's making preparation for a transgender society. It's part of that religion. It's part of that philosophy that I was talking about. It's enveloped in one of those bubbles that I was referring to. They want a transgender society. We are going to become amalgamated. And the reason why, and I mean the genders, are becoming amalgamated, and the reason why, it's, number one, there's an occultic reason behind it, because it opens a floodgate of sin and demonic influence in people's lives, unquestionably. It's one of the quickest ways to get demonic activity in your life is to enter into sexual immorality. That's one of the fast tracks. And guess what? Guess who knew that? Aleister Crowley understood that sex was the fastest medium to get demons and other entities intimately involved in your life, literally intimately involved in your life. And so this idea of transgender, it seems bizarre to people. You mentioned the transgender bathrooms. Let me make a veiled comment here. I don't want to break it down right now, but let me make a veiled comment. There are very, very well-known personalities in our country who are part of pop culture who are already transgender, and most people don't know about it. They had the surgeries. They had the what do you call them, the therapies, and there's some genetic technology that most people don't understand is already going on. Some genetic therapies, the hormones. That's what I was trying to say. There's the hormone therapy. There are people, and listen to me carefully, because my words right now are going to ring true for people in the coming days. There are people who are strategically placed in pop culture, in government, in the public eye, that are masquerading as one sex, but they're really not that sex. And it's going to come out. The old coming out of the closet used to be homosexuality. Not anymore, folks. The new coming out of the closet is going to be, I used to be a man. I used to be a woman. I'm telling you, it's coming. And people are going to be coming out of this new closet, and it's going to be dropping people's jaws, because some of the men in this country have been lusting over some of these women, and it's going to be a real shock to them when they find out that, hey, that's a dude. And there's a reason for it. They've been strategically placed in the public view because it is a push for transhumanism. And when it happens, just like homosexuals coming out of the closet, people were coming out in support, and hey, this is a beautiful thing, this is a wonderful thing, to be homosexual, bisexual. You're going to see the same movement for transhumanism. Isn't this beautiful that this person really found their identity, and they got the sex change, and they got the hormone therapy, and they got the genetic therapy, and now this person who was a little boy is now this beautiful woman. That's what's coming, and it's moving towards, it's this transgender, post-human, crazy paradigm that we are literally rocketing towards at an exponential pace. And there's nothing that anybody can do to stop it, because I believe it is core to biblical prophecy.
Well, what's really interesting, Tim, is you mentioned Madame Blavatsky, the good old most Luciferian woman ever, but the secret doctrines that she wrote, and of course Manly P. Hall wrote The Secrets of All Ages. You know, think about the very deep, dark, occultic knowledge that they get into in this book. It springboards into, I mean, they both thought that Lucifer was the right god of the world, and then they actually talked about how a different kind of ritualistic sex magics, which is really interesting. I mean, you fast forward to Lot, to Aleister Crowley, to Jack Parsons, to the Nazi backbreeding. I mean, the common thread really is very, I mean, the Mayans were notorious for evil and demonic sex, these sex rituals. And, we've talked about this, the sentient creatures that are whatever hybrid entities that are, they're sort of they're on the move for lust, and all this. It really ties into a very dark theme of of sex and reproduction, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Like I said, like I mentioned earlier, Aleister Crowley believed that a lot of it, because during his days was really when the occult began to peak on a global scale, worldwide. Spiritualism, seances, consulting with the dead, trying to make contact with beings from other planets was really peaking during Aleister Crowley's time. And Aleister Crowley, he looked at a lot of this spiritualism, and he was even part of some of the brotherhoods in England and different parts of I think he was part of one specifically in Geneva. The name escapes me right now. I think it was the Order of the Dawn, if I remember right. I can't remember. But anyways, his mentality was everybody's just playing at witchcraft. Everybody's just playing at sorcery. Everybody's dressing up in robes and seances and orgies, but nobody's really actually making hardcore contact with the entities. That's really what was the driving force in Aleister Crowley's life. And so he purposely went about performing the most insane, diabolical, disgusting acts, sexual acts that he could possibly imagine. That was the point, was to get to such a level of depravity, to get to such a level of sexual depravity and licentiousness and lust, and that through that portal, through that mechanism, he would be able to make contact with these beings, to really make contact with these beings, and to not play at sorcery, but to absolutely be possessed and enveloped by these other entities. And that is precisely what happened. It wasn't just Aleister Crowley. All the high-ranking occultists, most of which are unknown. Sometimes people, when I mention Aleister Crowley, they kind of get on my case and say Aleister Crowley wasn't really a bigwig in terms of the occult. He was more of a pop culture figure. The answer to that, my answer to that is yes and no. It's true and it's not true. He wasn't as bigwig as some of the bloodline families behind the scenes that have been having intercourse with demons for many, many ages, and that I don't even believe are fully human. But he was definitely connected to the occult to the degree that he became a channel. He became what's the word I'm looking for? A cord, a connection to the like an electrical cord plugged into the occult world, mainstreaming it into public awareness. That's the main thing that I see that came as a result of Aleister Crowley's sorcery. He brought it into a level that became so public. He mainstreamed it into everybody's lives, because eventually his Thelema and the religion of Thelema and his philosophies became the undergirding for, believe it or not, for Hollywood, for the liberal movement, and for much of what's infected this country since the early 20th century. So what we have now is we're at a point now, the foundation of occultism that's leading us into the new human paradigm, the new golden age, and the new golden race. The foundation was occultism. It had to be brought into the mainstream. It had to be brought into public awareness. And listen, this is key. It had to be accepted. It has to be accepted because we have free will as human beings. The devil doesn't force us to sin, for example. God doesn't allow those things to happen. He defends our free will. He allows us to hate him if we so choose, if we're foolish enough to hate him. He allows us to do that. It's free will. So even when we talk about conscious evolution and post-humanism, this thing is going to go global because it is free will. We have to accept it, and we're beginning to accept it. And people are going to massively accept it as soon as it can be proven that by becoming something other than human, we can eradicate cancer, we can eradicate AIDS, we can eradicate a lot of the symptoms of mortality and definitely, absolutely extend the human lifespan.
Well, what's interesting when you say becoming something less than human, what's interesting in the push for transhumanism, if we become something less than human, Tim, as in transhumanist, then are we unredeemable?
I believe the answer to that question is unequivocally yes, but it depends. There's a red line. There's a line drawn in the sand somewhere. I don't know where it is. Where when you cross that line, again, let's go back to the question, what does it mean to be human in the first place? So what genetic trademarks do we have as a species that make us human? They're there. They're present. We literally have a package of genes that makes us human. It's not just the entirety of our genome, because when compared with chimps, when compared with gorillas, with primates, we're somewhere between 95 and 98 to 90% the same genetically. When I say the same, I mean similar. In other words, we have the majority of the genes that we have in our genome are shared by primates. So there is literally a package of genetic trademarks, genetic markers that designate us as human, that make us human. What we're going to see is it's already beginning with what's called gene therapy. And gene therapy at this point, gene therapy is accelerating behind the scenes, by the way, but gene therapy at this point is based on human-to-human gene transplantation. It's very simple. If I have a gene that causes cancer, let's say that causes cancer in 60% of the people that have this gene, they end up getting a certain kind of cancer. Doctors can now identify that, because a lot of it, because we've sequenced the genome. Okay, so we can get our genome sequenced, I think, for a couple $100 at this point, and so scientists can identify that gene that causes cancer, and they can look over. They can go to a person who doesn't have that gene. They can go locate the area that gene, that cancer-causing gene, is located, the genetic loci where that gene resides, and they can take it from the person. They can copy it from the person who has the equivalent of that gene that doesn't cause cancer, and they can then introduce it into the genome, replace that cancer-causing gene with the gene from the other person that has the healthy genome, that they don't, with the absence of that cancer-causing gene. That's human-to-human gene therapy. A lot is going to be accomplished through human-to-human gene therapy. This kind of information is not just interesting. It's not just provocative. It is necessary. We've got to understand this stuff, because if you go and you get human-to-human gene therapy, let's say that somebody listening right now may even be considering this, by the way, as long as it's human-to-human, it's not changing your humanity. It's not replacing one of the fundamental trademarks of you being human. It's not doing that. But there is coming a time when we already know, when we're going to get to the point where we realize, and I said we already know, that there is so much genetic, what's the word I'm looking for? Let's just call it delinquency. There's so much genetic delinquency in the human genome. We have more genetic disorders and diseases, way more than any other species. Isn't that interesting? The human race, we've got so many more genetic dysfunctions than other creatures. Like cows have a handful, dogs have a handful, humans have hundreds of genetic disorders. There's reasons for that, by the way, that go way back to antediluvian times. But at some point in time, we're going to hit the ceiling with human-to-human gene transplantation. And we're going to realize that if we really want to bring about a transformation of human health, if we really want to improve the human condition, and let me get back to that term in a little bit, improve the human condition radically, then we're going to have to look outside of the human genome. We're going to have to look for genetic solutions from non-human entities. First, we're going to look to animals, but eventually we're going to look to other sentient, conscious entities that are not human for transplantation of genetic material. That's when the game gets really, really, really serious in terms of becoming irredeemable, unredeemable. And by the way, that will be a choice. You are going to have to make a choice. The Bible says that they overcame the dragon, the book of Revelations, they overcame the dragon by the blood of the Lamb, the word of their testimony, and that they did not love their lives unto death. Not only does that mean that they didn't shrink from death in the face of persecution, it also means that they did not love their lives enough to do whatever it takes to extend them, including gene therapy involving non-human genetic trademarks.
Well, Satan sure seems to be interested in our DNA, and as you were talking, you talked about sentient creatures, and I was thinking, fallen angels, they have multitude of sentient creatures, that are very much like us, by the way, and have these other quasi-supernatural, ethereal, hybrid entities or beings, and they have some of the genetic markers of the fallen angels, and they have technologies, that they're far smarter, and they have knowledge passed down from the Watchers and genetic markers of their progenitors. So when you mix in, the DNA from these giants or fallen angels or animals, Tom Horn talks a lot about meshing human and animal chimeras. All these creatures and entities, they really, like Satan, who's interested in our DNA, they sure despise the human race, don't they?
There's a number of reasons why they're interested in our DNA. Obviously, in the beginning, there was a conspiracy to prevent the kinsman redeemer, Jesus Christ. Of course, if there's no pure human beings on the earth, how can you get a kinsman redeemer through the womb of a woman, through the womb of a human being that can save the human race? That kinsman redeemer has to be kinsman. In other words, human, fully human, by the way. That's a topic for another day. But really that's one of the primary, and many people have identified that as being one of the strategies of why the devil was so interested in screwing with our genetics. Yes, absolutely, that's one of the strategies. And deception really is the key here, right? Because these transhumanists really want to make people believe of these promises of, a better body, a better brain. They've really adopted a religious-like theme that allows them to, pay the Pied Piper, and it lures young people, old people into really a terrifying trap. And we're warned about these false teachers, and 2 Timothy 3:13, evildoers and imposters go from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived. John 8:4 is very clear. You are from the father, your father, the devil. He was a murderer from the beginning and does not stand in the truth. And it's incredible that Satan promises godlike rewards, but he can't deliver, really, can he? No, he can't. And he was really trying to destroy the coming of the kinsman redeemer. A lot of people understand that narrative. But let me bring a new narrative to the table tonight. And this blew my mind when it occurred to me. I want everybody listening, for those of you who are believers, I want you to remember the story of Jacob and Esau. For those of you who aren't, the story of Jacob, and when I say believers, I'm referring to in the gospel of Jesus Christ, and who aren't familiar with the Bible, this applies to you as well, because the premise, the paradigm is what the Luciferian factions behind the scene are working towards. Jacob and Esau is I used to read over the story of Jacob and Esau rather glibly when I was a child. It was just a fascinating story. Actually, let me take that back. It wasn't very fascinating to me. It was actually pretty boring to me, the story of Jacob and Esau. It was bizarre. I never really understood the story of Jacob and Esau. It was just bizarre. But one day it hit me like a wrecking ball. Jacob and Esau, what's going on in the story of Jacob and Esau is covert. It's something covert that really the text doesn't come out and tell you. You have to look at it and look at it and look at it until it dawns on you. And you have to look at it from a genetic perspective, like so many things in the Bible. You have to look at it from a perspective of bloodlines, genetic, the human genome, the human species, rather than just a a story. And I said that I like to look at the Bible as a story, but that story cannot be understood if you don't understand genetics. And I don't mean having the understanding of somebody who went to university for genetics. I'm talking about having a superficial understanding of genetics is enough to understand, to unlock so much of what's hidden in the pages of the Bible, not just in the Bible, of all kinds of ancient manuscripts. But let me get back to Jacob and Esau. Jacob and Esau is a story of, I like to think of it as a story of usurpation, because that's what it is. There were twins in the womb of Isaac's wife. Her name escapes me. Rebecca. So there were twins in Rebecca's womb. These twins, when they were birthed, when she conceived, something very interesting, the Bible says something very interesting about them that most people don't get. It's just bizarre, but it doesn't click anything in their minds. Jacob and Esau were twins, okay? I want everybody to understand that. They were twins. They were born at the same time. However, they were vastly different genetically speaking, okay? This resonates with me because I happen to be a twin. I happen to be an identical twin. You don't have twins, especially identical twins that are vastly different genetically, because they come from the same cell, basically. So they're not vastly different genetically. That would mean that they're not twins. They're very similar genetically. Very similar genetically. And so Jacob and Esau pop out of the womb. Jacob comes out second, holding on, or I'm sorry, I think Jacob comes out second, holding on to Esau's heel. Okay, so Esau pops out first, and Sheila, correct me if I'm screwing this up. Jacob comes out holding on to Esau's heel. Now that's very interesting. But what's really interesting is the fact that when Esau pops out of the womb, he's a hairy beast. I mean, literally, the Bible says he's a hairy beast. In fact, you can look at some of the words. I don't have them in front of me. I wasn't prepared to talk about this tonight. But if you break it down and you really look at what the words mean, and you look at the Hebrew, you realize that not only was he a hairy beast, he had a red tincture to his skin or to his hair. He was a red, hairy beast. He was a hairy beast when he popped out. And I don't know about everybody listening, but if my wife's pregnant right now with a boy, and when she delivers the boy in October, if that boy pops out looking like an ape, that's going to be a problem in my mind. That's not going to be normal. Okay, so you have to start from there. It's not normal. Esau is not normal. Stop, go back, read the story, and understand that Esau is not genetically normal. Okay, let me put it in these terms. He's not fully human. Okay, and Jacob is holding on to his heel when they come out. Because the birthright, this is what it's about, folks, and I'm sorry I can't break down all the Hebrew and everything right now because I simply don't have it in front of me, and my memory, frankly, isn't that great. So Jacob comes out holding on to Esau's heel. Jacob is a normal-looking human being. There's nothing in the Bible that would indicate that Jacob was anything but human. But Esau, on the other hand, is not so much a normal human being. This is a guy who is very fierce. In fact, the way that the Bible describes him is very much akin to the way that the Gibborim in the Bible are described. The mighty men of old are described in the Bible. He has the trademarks of the Gibborim. He's a mighty hunter, which is one of the trademarks. He's fierce. He's a fierce warrior hunter type. Very different from his brother Jacob. Again, I'm a twin. Twins have lots of similarities. Even if they look different, there are many, many, many similarities in their personalities, if not many things that are absolutely identical. Many things. In fact, it's uncanny sometimes. So we're talking about two very different beings, entities. One of them, in my opinion, is obviously not fully human. And the text is telling us this without saying, hey, this guy isn't fully human. That's the way so many passages are in the Bible. It's almost as if God purposely conceals these things, and we know that that's true because the verse says that it's the glory of God to conceal a thing, and the glory of kings to find it out. So God delights in concealing things that we have to go and dig and discover. I think this is one of those things, and it is crucial to understand Jacob and Esau, because we have the rest of the story is that the birthright was going to be bestowed by Isaac. And the birthright, we've lost the birthright, by the way, in our society. The birthright in the ancient world was so important. People killed each other, literally, over the birthright. Because the birthright came with the full blessing of the family, of the father. He was bestowing the blessing upon his child. He was not only bestowing the blessing upon the child, he was passing the baton, listen to me, of authority to the firstborn.
Well, and think about how he did that, though, Tim. When Jacob came before Isaac to get the blessing, he actually put hair. They actually taped an animal so that he would think it was a hairy arm when he grabbed him. So he said, "Oh, let me feel your skin," and then he gave him the blessing. Isn't that interesting that you talked about Esau being very hairy?
Yeah, and interestingly enough, when I was a kid, I used to think to myself, I used to think Isaac must have been an idiot, right? He must have been an idiot, because how are you going to take a young goat's hair, just picture skinning a goat, taking the skin of the goat, which is what they did, and his mother did, Jacob's mother did, Rebecca, and wrapped it around his forearm. And how is anybody in their right mind going to mistake that for human skin? I don't care how hairy you are. I don't care, if you're the hairiest guy on the planet. Human hair and animal hair are very distinct. Very distinct. It's like you wouldn't pet your dog and mistake that for the arm of your wife or your son. No way. It's not going to happen. We're not talking about a hairy arm, folks. We're not talking about a human arm that was exceptionally hairy. We're talking about an arm that wasn't fully human. Understand it from a genetic perspective. We're talking about an arm that wasn't fully human. That's why it was such an obvious trademark of Esau. It was obvious to Isaac. Obvious. This is Esau because he's got this strange genetic trademark. It's unmistakable. It's obvious. In fact, Isaac wasn't an idiot. He was a wise man. And he was actually confused because Jacob's voice, when he came in to basically fool his father and get the birthright, Jacob's voice didn't match Esau's voice. And Isaac was confused. And he thought, he actually says, your voice is not the voice of Esau, but then he touched his forearm. And he thought, well, there's only one guy that I know that has an arm like this. So understand that this is not just something casual. This is profound. Jacob and Esau, profound. So let me tie this in. So Jacob comes out of his mother's womb, grasping on to Esau's heel, because Esau was about to usurp the birthright. Esau, who's supposedly his twin, but obviously something went awry in the womb or something else happened, and I have my theories. Obviously something went awry there, and Esau is no longer fully human. And he is, listen to this, folks, he is usurping the birthright of Jacob the human, usurping it. This was a plot of the devil, Esau. This wasn't just some casual thing. It was a plot. The devil knew that Israel was coming out of Jacob. that Israel was coming out of Jacob, that Israel was coming out of Isaac. And he sought to disrupt that. He sought to usurp it. The blessing, and let me change the word, okay? The authority that Isaac was about to bestow onto Esau. These names are confusing me in my head, I'm sorry. That what he was about to bestow, the authority, the blessing, the authority of the human race onto Esau. It would have been a usurpation of the authority invested in our species, in the human race. And people say, well, what do you mean? It's very simple. The book of Genesis, it lays it out twice, more than twice actually. It lays it out in the beginning when God created man. He gave him dominion over the whole earth, dominion over the earth. After the flood, and by the way, the Genesis 6 incursion of fallen angels and then the giants that came of that were the result of sexual intercourse with women and fallen angels, they were partly human, and they usurped authority. I'm finishing up tonight actually an analysis on the book of Giants, and again here we have the story of Genesis 6, the book of Giants that was discovered in the Dead Sea Scrolls. The story of Genesis 6 again laid out in great detail, describing how these giants, and it disagrees with the narrative in the Bible, it agrees with the narrative in the book of Enoch, how the giants, the hybrids, they were human hybrids, human angel hybrids, took authority over the earth and governed the earth and basically enslaved the human race. And so that was a usurpation of authority. It's happening again in the story of Jacob and Esau that we were talking about. The usurpation of the authority is happening again. But obviously, most people know the rest of the story. Jacob was able to convince his father Isaac that he was Esau, and as a result, the blessing, the authority of Isaac, of the firstborn son, that Isaac was bestowing, the authority of the firstborn son was bestowed upon Jacob rather than Esau, and the plot of the devil was foiled. And let me just, for those of you who are doubting this, let me remind you that Esau was severely ticked off when this happened. In fact, so ticked off that Jacob feared for his life. Remember what he did, Sheila? He was so mad. Remember what he did? He went over, and this is a fact. He went over, and just to spite his parents, he went and married a Nephilim woman. He went and married a woman that women actually two, I think it was two or more, definitely two, that were members of a Nephilim tribe. Isn't that interesting? That was his
interesting.
reaction.
And it's interesting you said, you're talking about usurping. I mean, God gave the human race dominion, but I guess essentially we could abdicate our dominion, couldn't we?
That's the name of the game, is abdication. That's the way that the devil gets the authority. The devil has authority to a certain degree. He's the prince of the power of the air. But never, not one time in the Bible, not one time does God give Satan the authority that he gave to men. Not one time. Not one time was the devil permitted to legally usurp human authority. Now notice the word legally usurp human authority. That authority that was invested in Adam and by de facto in the human race, not just in Christians or people of religion, in the human race via Adam, was reinstituted after the flood with Noah. God literally reinstituted and reiterated the authority that he gave to Noah precisely because of what occurred in Genesis 6, because the authority was usurped through the incursion of the fallen angels into the human populace, and by the way, into the human genome. By the way, it wasn't the angels themselves that usurped that authority. They did, but they did it de facto. They did it through their children, through their offspring. Why? Because their children were human enough to legally claim it. Now, that's my opinion, that's my theory, that's my postulate, that they were human enough to claim that authority. And so now we're coming full circle to what we've been talking about this whole time. What happens, this is a question I ask all the time, when we as the human race lose the authority that's been invested in us, when we were given the dominion over the earth, but it's contingent on us being human. It's authority bestowed on us, that was bestowed on our father, Adam, and then bestowed on our father, all of our father, Noah. 2 times. It was reiterated. It was never, ever taken away from the human race and given to the devil. Never. Now, when Satan is with Jesus and tempting Jesus, and he shows him the nations, and he offers him, I can give all of this. What did he say? Here's the key phrase. All of this has been what? Given to me. Where? Where has it all been given to the devil? Where in Scripture? No. It hasn't been given to the devil by God. It has been abdicated to him by men. That's where he gets his authority in the sphere of in the lives of human beings. Don't we know this to be true? Don't we know that the Bible warns us about giving the devil a foothold in our lives? Because essentially that word foothold can be substituted for the word authority, and not necessarily the Hebrew or Greek, just in the sense of the word. That by giving the devil a foothold through sin, we were talking about sexual sin being a gateway, a portal to demonic activity, we abdicate a level of authority in some realm for these entities to come and to influence us. And in some cases, authority is given to these entities, some of these entities, to inhabit people. Remember what Jesus said when he cast out demons from, he said this often, when he cast out demons from the demoniacs, he would say, "Go and sin no more." And he explained in one of the cases why he said that. He didn't come out and say, "This is why I'm saying it," but he made a reference. And he said, if you go back to that sin, you'll get demons that are 7 times worse than the ones that I just casted out. Isn't that interesting? If you go and do this, then it triggers this other thing. If you go and do this, then authority is suddenly abdicated or given, and these entities are going to come back with friends, basically. Let's just put it that way. Or other entities that were more powerful waiting in the wings are going to come, and you're going to have an even bigger problem. So this concept is absolutely defined in the Bible, absolutely defined in the Bible, and it answers the question. If there are so many alternate creatures out there that are not human, that are far more intelligent than we are, why don't they just kick us off the planet and take over? They're not allowed. It's so simple. It really is so simple. It's hard for people to believe. They're simply not permitted to do that because God enforces the authority. However, it can be abdicated. It can be abdicated. And we're coming into the times when humanity collectively, if we become something other than human collectively, not all of us will, there'll be resistance, but if the majority of our species becomes something other than human, and we lose those genetic trademarks that make us human, other entities, by the way, can gain those genetic trademarks. That's evident in Genesis 6, and can then usurp the authority that we have as human beings. And let me tell you something, Sheila, things are going to get messy when that happens.
Well, this host of entities that are leading into battle with high technology. I mean, we're told that in Scripture, this army that's going to make war with God. And there's a scripture, I said my king on my holy hill of Zion. What kind of, if you're going to take on Jesus Christ, that's going to be kind of interesting. I don't care what Satan thinks he can do. I mean, I think it's unfortunate, though, that Satan knows he's defeated more than most Christians. But, it's incredible when you think you might have these non-human allies that are in bed with him and his minions waging war on God. That's quite something, isn't it?
It's absolutely something, and I can just imagine all the multitudes of people rolling their eyes when we talk about non-human entities. Guess what, folks? That's where the human race is headed. That's where the human race is headed. That's exactly what we're talking about. Transhumanism, transitioning from being human to being something that is not fully human. That's where we're going. We're all on the bus right now. And we're literally going to have to literally hop off of that bus because all of society is moving that way. We're moving that way.
Well, and I like what you know this quote Steve Quayle's term, dumb unto death. I mean, people do perish for lack of knowledge, and we are supposed to be paying attention and looking at the affairs of the earth and being wise as serpents and living with our eyes open. But it's incredible to me how I always say people are mindless sheeple, but it's incredible how the ignorance is getting worse. It's getting worse in the church too, and I have to wonder if the only thing that isn't holding back the flood of evil that is about to be unleashed is God, really, and yet repentance, is a key piece in the last warnings, and it's amazing. I always think of God lifts his hand off, look out.
Yeah. I want to revisit this term, improve the human condition that I mentioned earlier. And by the way, before I move on to that, what you just said, God lifts his hand. I'm wondering, Sheila, a lot of this is my postulations. I want people to understand that. I'm wondering at this point, looking at all of this from a genetic standpoint, if the lifting, the restrainer, is that authority invested in humanity. If that lifting is a result of us losing the authority. And actually, before I move on to what I was going to say, a point that I really wanted to make, think about this. This is such a provocative thought to me. And obviously, you and I could sit here and talk for hours about it. This is such a provocative thought to me. We can trace the authority that God's given us in Scripture, and we can define it. The Bible tells us, take dominion over all the earth, it says. Over all the animals and everything. Take dominion over all the earth. The Bible never tells us, never indicates that we, as the human race, have dominion on the moon. That we, as the human race, have dominion on Mars. That we, as the human race, have dominion anywhere else but the planet Earth. Isn't it interesting? You mentioned Jack Parsons earlier. Isn't it interesting when you do the research, you find that obviously the United States never had a space program. We adopted the Nazi space program. Literally, we brought the Nazis over and we put them in charge of our space program. We did.
Yep, we sure
did. People
did.
can research that. We didn't have a space program. We adopted, basically, we went over there and we took the Nazi space program because they certainly did have a space program, and we just brought it over to the United States. We patriated it, so to speak. We brought it over with all these notorious evil Nazis that were, saluting Heil Hitler all day long.
Look at Werner von Braun. He was actually on record, the card-carrying Nazi, saying that he attributed all his space. He was a rocket science, and he said, "Hey, we get our information from," he was hinting, out of this world. Well, probably very demonic information.
Absolutely, and his mentor Herman Oberth said we had help when responding to how did you guys come up with all this stuff. We had help, and they said, "What do you mean?" This is literally his words. People from other worlds.
Other worlds, that's exactly verbatim.
It doesn't get more specific than that. I mean, it wasn't like it was the Russians or something. No, he defined it. People from other worlds helped us develop technology, tangible technology.
Yeah.
So then we had these guys being incorporated. By the way, all these guys, almost all, if you were a high-ranking Nazi, you were an occult member. You were an occult, certainly the SS.
Yes.
Certainly the SS. But not only the SS, also the Thule, or the Thule Society, the Society of the Black Sun. You were an occult member if you were a high-ranking SS. You had to be.
Yeah.
You were on some level involved in the occult. And so we brought over these members, these scientists. We went and hung, we went and hung the ones that we didn't really care about, and the only one that we really wanted to keep around, which was Jesus' name escapes me, Albert Speer. Long enough to extract some more information from him, we let him survive and sit in jail for a long time.
Yeah.
But anyways, we brought over, because he was the Minister of Armaments and he knew about some of this stuff going on, even though he doesn't talk about it in his book. People are going to say, inside the Third Reich, he never mentions UFOs and all that. Of course not. You think they would have ever let the guy out of jail? I'm sure that that was one of the conditions. In fact, he probably told him, write a book and purposely don't mention this stuff.
Yeah.
So they would have never let the guy out of jail if he would have, or he wouldn't have survived for very long after jail if he would have talked about the saucer program and the space program that the Nazis were developing, way beyond, by the way, the Vril rocket. Listen, yeah, they had the Vril rocket, the Vril 1 and Vril 2, but they also had the Vril saucer, the Vril 1 and the Vril 2 saucer, and the Henube, the giant saucer, the giant craft. So anyway, digressing back into my original point, we brought all these guys over. They became our space program. The Nazi technology was our technology. And so many of the people, not just the Nazis, the other guys like Jack Parsons, the Rocket Man, Jack Parsons, who was the leader of the program at the propulsion laboratory, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He was a devout occultist, as you mentioned, he was an acolyte of Aleister Crowley. He was actually going to take over leadership of the Order of the Orient, whatever. I can't remember what the name of it, all these different names of these societies and all, secret societies. But the point is that, guess what? The guys who planned our landing on the moon, the guys who planned, and let me definitely say our landing on the moon because there's no question about it, were occult members, the majority of them, or at least the principal players, including Jack Parsons. They were occultic members. And when I say occultic, we're talking about sacrifices, we're talking about ritual sexual magic. You mentioned the Babylon working that Jack Parsons did with what's his name, Scientology guy, Ron Hubbard, and these guys are the ones who plotted out where we were going to land on the moon, how we were going to go, the dates that we were going to go, and guess what? It just so happens, coincidentally, they're all associated with the occult, all of them. The coordinates where we landed, the dates, and I don't have all that information in front of me right now. That's a whole show in and of itself. But just go and do the investigation for the people who are listening. They're all occultic coordinates. They're occultic dates. They did it purposely. Listen, folks. We were enticed into space. We were enticed into space. It wasn't just the great human spirit like we're told in school that we're going to go out in space and John F. Kennedy, we're going to go out and and do this wonderful thing. Oh no, we were enticed, beguiled, tricked into going into space, and there's many, many reasons for that. But one of the reasons is because we don't have authority on the moon, number one. We don't have authority on Mars. We have no business, and I know people are going to get mad at me for saying this, Sheila, because it's the great American spirit and the great American feat. No, it's not. It's really, I'm sorry to say it, folks, but it's really a Nazi feat more than it is an American one. We got their technology. We did it based on their work. And there were great Americans that came along and helped and pushed the technology further. But so many of them were either Nazis or cult members, or members of covens and secret societies. I'm sorry, but that's a fact. As much as it hurts our American pride to admit that, to realize that, it's the truth. It is
and
truth.
all these occultic Nazis were really eugenicists, really. That was their big push, wasn't it? So springboarding really into transhumanism. I mean, when you step back and think about how God created us, Tim, the complexity of the human cells and the multitude of cells and our DNA, it's incredible. So unless transhumanists can somehow miraculously resurrect the dead, really all this so-called other technology, I mean, really no matter how advanced they get it from Satan, his minions, you're never going to replace what God makes. You cannot duplicate God. You cannot replicate DNA. So, these futurists and transhumanists and occultic Luciferians, they figure they have all the answer, but these minions will never duplicate God, will they?
Well, no, they won't. What's the great thrust of transhumanism? What's the great thrust of post-humanism? The great thrust is defined by the term improve the human condition. That's their moral banner. We want to improve the human condition. We're for the human race. We want to improve the human condition. We want to make humans smarter. We want to make humans happier. We want to eliminate disease and genetic dysfunctions. We want to have harmony with the earth and make humans interface better with nature like animals do, with sixth senses and things like that. So it's all about improving the human condition, and that's all fine and dandy until you define what the human condition is. What is the human condition? Again, what does it mean to be human? What is the human condition? Well, the human condition can be summed up in two words: sin and death. That is the human condition. Sin and death. That is our condition. And whether you believe in the Bible or not, it doesn't matter. Guess what? You sin, and brother, you're going to die. That's your condition as a human being. Now, we have to ask the question. I know we're running out of time here real fast. We have to ask the question, is that natural? Is death natural? Is death an intrinsic part of life? The answer, of course, is no. But it's come as a result of a curse. So can you really subvert the curse of death, of sin and death? Can you really do that? Is that even possible? Well, I think it is to a degree, but it involves changing your condition. In other words, altering your condition, it involves, I'm sorry, I botched that. Changing your condition as a human being is going to necessitate changing the fact that you are of the species of a human being, basically, is what I'm driving at here. In other words, going all the way back to what we were talking about in the beginning, yes, life extension, yes, being able to live 30 more years, 40 more years, 50 more years, yes, that's going to be available in the coming future. But you're probably, in my opinion, you're definitely going to have to sacrifice your humanity to participate. Does Mark of the Beast start ringing a little differently in people's heads?
Yeah, that's incredible. Well, and it's really not just these occultic Luciferians and transhumanists or even the Illuminati or their, little their imaginations of a Mark of the Beast system. This is really Psalm 2, isn't it? Psalms 2, really, isn't it?
It's absolutely Psalm 2. It's absolutely Psalm 2. What kind of weapons do you bring to a war with God Almighty? Not only God Almighty, understanding, number one, who He is, number two, who His anointed one, capital A, capital O, His anointed one is. Full understanding of who they are and saying, let us break their bonds asunder. Let's come out from under their authority and their thraldom. That's Luciferianism. Luciferianism, the narrative of Luciferianism is that Adonai, God, is evil. He's the one who has subjugated humanity beneath his thraldom. And Lucifer, the son of the morning, is the light bringer. He's the Prometheus to the human race. He's breaking those bonds of thraldom to God, who keeps us in a Neanderthalic state and hides all this technology and knowledge from us. And Satan is the good guy behind the scenes working to give it to us, to give this technology to us, to enlighten us, to teach us about free energy and about all this other stuff that's coming and life extension. I mean, really, everybody needs to take another look at the Bible from a genetic perspective. And
yeah, I think
things
that
start to pop.
That is a good handbook. But what's interesting is, he also goes on to say there, you said a really interesting piece about, when you're talking about Psalm 2, I'm thinking about the word, let us break their bands asunder. What's interesting is cast away their cords from us. But go on, springboard a little bit down there and see when he talks about thou shalt break with a rod of iron, thou shalt dash them in pieces like a potter's vessel. I mean, just think of that for a minute. Just not a problem, curse smash, right?
Absolutely. Remember the prophecy in the book of Daniel 2, with the statue that Nebuchadnezzar saw. And after the statue represents all the empires on the earth, and the last one is the one that's going to be mingled with them. And what happens? A boulder comes and it just smashes that thing to powder, including the final empire that's going to be ruled, by the way, and directed by human non-humans, by people that are not fully human. And the Bible says that. It doesn't say human, non-human, but it alludes to that, absolutely alludes to it in so many ways. And that boulder represents the kingdom, the everlasting kingdom of our kinsman redeemer, Jesus Christ, fully human, fully God, who comes and absolutely smashes that final empire, grinds it into powder. That's what Psalms 2 is
and we're
referring
also,
to.
Yeah, but we're also given a very key admonishing there too. Kiss the Son, pay homage to him in purity, lest he be angry and you perish in the way, for soon shall be his wrath kindled. Well, obviously, repentance is a big key to this. I mean, I think of Psalm 91, Tim, under the shadow. How close do you have to be with someone to be under their shadow? Pretty close. So I can't help but sound like a parrot, but this is no time for casual Christianity. And I wonder how many of these ubiquitous, lukewarm, anything goes Christians, it's not going to cut it where things are heading. I think about the Elijah's, admonition in the showdown of the prophets of Baal, and he said, listen, you can't have one foot in the world and one foot in the things of God. This is really time to really be seeking God first and his righteousness, because, I couldn't believe that this morning quickly I was listening to Joseph Prince, and he was going on and on about, hey, grace covers all sins, past, present, future. You don't have to be, forget about repentance. I mean, and what does the Bible say? Woe to someone listening to any other gospel. So very, very fascinating program tonight. Tim, I mean, we probably could have had about 16 more hours, but we will definitely have you back soon. Tim, just tell people where they can find you, please.
SteveQuell.com. I do the El Bruno analysis. By the way, I'm revamping the analysis. I've been using just a webcam, and it's been very low budget. We're revamping it. We're going to the next level with it. So should have the next video out, the revamped version out early this week. SteveQuell.com, the El Bruno analysis.
Yeah, if you guys go to stevequell.com, folks, you can click on the right there, and you'll see that little, it's red and white tab. And I want to thank everyone for tuning in. Thank you very much for coming on tonight, Tim. And I just want to thank everyone for tuning into the program. We'll see you next Saturday night. Thanks for tuning in.